Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. It started with a sound, a faint tapping like fingernails on old wood. Harmless, maybe even forgettable, if not for the fact that it always came at exactly 3:17 a.m. Not a minute sooner, not a second later. At first, Jamie thought it was the house settling. The building was over 100 years old, a Victorian nestled in a quiet corner of Milford, a town so tucked away it felt like time forgot it. He had inherited the house from his uncle, a man he hadn't seen in over a decade, and whom no one in the family really talked about anymore. The will arrived out of nowhere, unsigned and unnotarized, yet the paperwork slid through like warm butter. No legal hang-ups. No estate battles. Just a key, a letter, and one instruction written in jittery black ink. Never open the door in the attic. It should have been a red flag. It should have been the red flag. But curiosity is a funny thing. It doesn't shout, it whispers. Jamie moved in during the off-season. Most of Milford had gone silent for winter. Snow had come early, and by November, the roads were already powdered in white. He liked the quiet. After what happened in the city, the silence was a relief. No sirens. No faces he couldn't forget. No memories slashing through sleep like broken glass. But that sound, that damn tapping, it started the first night. He'd woken to pitch blackness. The kind so dense it feels wet. He blinked into it, unsure of what stirred him. Until he heard it again, tap, 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 from beneath the floorboards. It was slow, deliberate, like something was thinking between each knock, measuring, waiting. By the third night it had a rhythm, 3 taps, a pause, 4 taps, then silence, always in that sequence, always at 3:17 a.m. He recorded it once, played it back in the morning. The audio was there, sure, but quieter, duller. Less sinister in daylight. He almost laughed it off. Almost. But then the scratches appeared. They weren't on the walls or doors or windows like you'd expect from raccoons or some errant forest animal. No, these were under the rug in the upstairs hallway. Jamie found them when he tripped on a fold in the floor covering and bent down to straighten it. What he saw made his throat close. Something had carved a series of shapes into the floorboards. Shapes that looked like they belonged in an ancient text. Not a suburban home. Circles intersected with jagged lines, strange loops connected by arrow-tipped slashes. It wasn't random. It was drawn. And it was fresh. The wood was lighter where it had been scraped, as if done recently. Too recently. That same night, Jamie didn't sleep. Not because he didn't try, but because he couldn't. His eyes wouldn't close. His body wouldn't settle. Every creak in the walls felt like a whisper. Every groan of the wind sounded like breath behind his ear. When the tapping began again, it felt louder, closer. This time, it didn't stop after the usual sequence. It kept going. Tap, pause, tap, 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 pause. Then it moved. He heard it travel, from beneath the floorboards in the hallway to under his bedroom. The taps weren't just taps anymore. They were footsteps. Slow, dragging, shuffling footsteps. And they circled his bed. He didn't move. He barely breathed. Something in him, the animal part that doesn't need logic, screamed not to look, not to make a sound. He stayed that way until dawn cracked the sky open and the world thawed. That morning, he found something under his bed. A small piece of paper. Yellowed, folded neatly. He hadn't placed it there. He would have remembered. His fingers trembled as he unfolded it. There was only one word written, scratched in the same erratic ink as the attic warning. Less 10. He almost left that day. Almost packed a bag and drove until the snow turned to rain and the mountains became billboards again. But the thing about curiosity, it doesn't let go. It plants a seed, waters it with every unanswered question, and lets it bloom into something impossible to ignore. Jamie told himself it was stress. Residual trauma from the city. A trick of the mind in an old creaking house. He told himself that right up until the night he heard the laughter. It was faint and distant, but unmistakable. Laughter of something that knew it shouldn't be laughing. Childlike and broken, echoing from beneath the boards again. Though this time it didn't follow a path. It stayed in one place, just under the attic stairs. And that's when he noticed something he hadn't before. The attic door, the one from the letter, had a lock. Not on the outside, but on the inside. A metal bolt twisted inward, as though someone had tried to lock something in, not keep intruders out. He stared at that lock for a long time. Tried to pretend he hadn't noticed the ash, like smear along the base of the door frame, or the way the wood was warped and blackened around the hinges. That night, he dreamed. In the dream, the attic door was open, wide. Inside, the floor was covered in water, ankle deep and rippling. But there was no light source. Just a reddish glow that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Something sat in the far corner, unmoving. A figure, small, skeletal, its head too large for its body. It stared with hollow, cracked eyes and a mouth that never moved. But Jamie heard it speak. It said only this: "You broke the seal." He woke up screaming. The next few days blurred. He tried calling people. Friends, cousins, even a paranormal group he found online. No one picked up. Not a single voice on the other end. Just static. Or worse, dead silence. Then came the visitors. The first was a man, middle-aged, thin, pale. He appeared on Jamie's porch with no car, no coat, in the middle of a snowstorm. Knocked twice, slow and steady, just like the tapping. Jamie opened the door with hesitation. The man said only one sentence before turning and walking back into the white void of the snow. The house remembers what was buried. The second visitor never knocked. Jamie found her in the backyard, barefoot, standing in the snow in a nightgown that clung to her like wet tissue. Her eyes were gone, not gouged, just gone, like empty sockets were all there ever was. She didn't speak, just smiled. A wide, cracked smile that blotted at the corners. When he blinked, she was gone. Something was happening. The house was waking up. The final straw came 5 days after the first sound. Jamie had started sleeping downstairs, too afraid to be near the attic. He bolted the bedroom doors shut, lined the hallway with salt. Did every superstitious thing he could recall from every horror book he ever read. But none of it mattered. At 3:17 a.m., the power went out. Every light died. Even his phone wouldn't turn on. The fire in the hearth snuffed itself out without warning. Then came the tapping. Louder, heavier. Like fists now, pounding under the boards. From the living room. From the kitchen. From the walls. Everywhere. Then silence. A long, stretching silence that screamed louder than any noise. Then, the attic door creaked open. He didn't go up. He couldn't. But he saw the red light spill down the stairs like blood. Heard the water dripping. Smelled the rot. And just before he passed out from sheer terror, he heard the voice again. Closer this time. Right behind his ear. You should have listened. When he woke the next morning, everything was normal. No door ajar. No water. No red light. No blood. But on the floor, placed exactly where he would see it, was another note. It read, "This was the first knock. There will be 33 more." And so began the countdown. 33 more nights. 33 more sounds. Each one closer. Each one darker. Each one pulling Jamie and the house closer to whatever had been sealed away all those years ago. Because the truth was, Jamie hadn't inherited a home. He had inherited a prison. And something inside was almost free. Jamie didn't leave the house the next morning. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. The front door, the same one he'd used dozens of times in the past week, was jammed. The lock twisted, the hinges stubborn. The wood strangely warped as though it had swollen from the inside. He yanked and kicked, but the door wouldn't budge, not even an inch. Windows, nailed shut from the outside. Every last one. He had checked them once when he moved in. Dusty, sure, but functional. Now they were sealed tight, boards somehow embedded deep into the frames. Someone, or something, wanted him inside. And for the first time, Jamie realized this wasn't his house anymore. If it ever had been. The note, the one that said 33 more, was still where he left it. The handwriting matched the one from before, but the ink seemed wetter, fresher, as if someone had placed it there moments before he woke. He stared at it for a long time, willing it to explain itself. What did it mean, 33 more? 33 more nights? Sounds, doors. Questions piled on each other in a suffocating stack, and underneath them all was one answerless thought. What happens after 34? Trying to keep his mind occupied, Jamie began to explore the parts of the house he had ignored so far. There was the kitchen, old but charming, with hanging copper pots and a stone sink that hissed slightly when the water ran. The dining room, dusty and untouched, still set with plates and silverware like someone expected guests who never came. And then there was the basement. He hadn't gone down there yet. Not once. Not because he'd forgotten, but because something about the door made his chest tighten. It was tucked behind the kitchen pantry, barely noticeable, painted the same color as the wall. A narrow staircase led downward into the dark. The air that drifted up was damp and smelled faintly of rust and something else. Something organic. Jamie stood at the top of the stairs for nearly 5 minutes, staring into the black. There was no switch, no pull cord. He grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and took a breath. The light cut through the dark in a narrow beam as he descended. The stairs groaned under each step, the wood soft in places, as if moisture had gnawed away the strength. At the bottom, he found a stone floor, cracked and uneven, with roots bulging through the walls like veins under skin. The basement was larger than expected, maybe the same footprint as the entire house. Shelves lined one side, stacked with jars, some filled with dust, others with murky liquid that sloshed when he got too close. In the far corner, something moved. Jamie froze. The flashlight flickered. Not out, just glitching, like something didn't want to be seen. He stepped forward, slowly. Crunch. Broken glass underfoot. He lowered the beam, and there it was. A man, sitting in the corner, knees tucked to chest, arms wrapped around his legs. Pale skin stretched tight across his face, mouth slightly agape. His eyes were milky, like he'd been blind for years, or worse, like he'd seen too much. Jamie's voice caught in his throat, but he managed to croak, "Who are you?" The man didn't respond, but his mouth moved, not like he was talking, like he was chewing. Jamie stepped closer. That was when he saw it. His hands weren't empty. They were holding something. A small, cracked object the color of ash. It looked like a bone. Human. Jamie staggered back, nearly slipping on the wet stone. The man's head turned slowly, mechanically, like a puppet on a rusty hinge. Then he smiled. "You heard it too, didn't you?" Jamie couldn't answer. His heart pounded against his ribs like it was trying to escape. "It starts with the floorboards," the man said, voice low, calm, like he was describing a memory. "But it doesn't stay there. It moves, it learns. It watches what scares you most." Jamie took another step back, flashlight trembling in his grip. "What is it?" he whispered. The man's smile widened, pulling his cheeks into grotesque folds. "It's not what. It's who." Suddenly, the light flickered violently and died. The room went pitch black. Jamie scrambled for the stairs, crashing into shelves, knocking over jars. The smell was worse now, like rot and blood and dirt left in a closed box. As he stumbled upward, he heard the man's voice again, softer now, drifting through the dark. 32 more. When Jamie slammed the basement door shut and bolted it, his hands wouldn't stop shaking. He leaned against the door, trying to slow his breathing, his pulse thundering in his ears. What the hell was happening? Who was that man? Why hadn't he called for help? Why hadn't he moved? Then he remembered something. The mirror in the upstairs hallway. Antique, heavy, framed in tarnished brass. He passed it every day and never paid it much mind. But this time when he looked at it, really looked, he saw something that didn't make sense. His reflection was delayed, only by a second. A heartbeat, but it was off. Like the version of him inside the mirror was catching up, mimicking what had already been done. And then, for a blink of a second, it didn't match at all. Jamie turned his head. His reflection smiled, and then it vanished. He stumbled back, nearly knocking over a lamp. He looked again. Nothing. Just him, pale and horrified. But the feeling that lingered was thick and cold. Something had looked out from behind his eyes. That night, he didn't sleep. He didn't even lie down. He sat in the living room, facing the attic stairs, a knife clutched in his lap, and every light in the house turned on. But when 3:17 a.m. came, every bulb exploded at once. Not burst, exploded. Glass sprayed across the floor. Sparks hissed, the house went silent. And in that suffocating dark, he heard the tapping again. But this time, it wasn't beneath the floorboards. It was inside the walls. Scraping. Crawling. Breathing. He backed into a corner, knife raised, trying to convince himself it wasn't real. That he wasn't losing his mind. But then something laughed. A short, sharp burst that cut through the silence like a knife. It was the same laugh from before. That broken, childlike cackle. Only now it wasn't distant. It was right behind him. He spun, slashing with the knife, but struck only air. Nothing was there. Except a note. Pinned to the wall with a rusted nail, it had appeared out of nowhere. Jamie's fingers trembled as he pulled it free. It read, "It found the man in the basement. Now it's looking for you." His knees buckled. Whatever this was, whatever had been trapped in the attic, it was loose. And it wasn't just haunting the house anymore. It was learning. It was choosing. And Jamie was next. The snowstorm had not let up. Thick, blinding white swallowed Milford like a slow suffocation. Sealing Jamie even further inside the house he now understood was more of a maze than a home. Each window revealed nothing but swirling whiteness. A curtain of snow so dense it turned morning into dusk. And yet, in that blizzard, wrapped silence, the house itself had begun to breathe. It started with the vents. Jamie first noticed it while sitting on the couch, every muscle in his body knotted with tension. He'd spent the day boarding the attic shut with whatever wood he could find. Old furniture, panels ripped from cabinets. Even the basement door he yanked off its hinges. But now, hours later, in the dead quiet of early evening, something whistled softly through the heating vents. At first, he assumed it was just the furnace, old pipes, old house. But when he leaned closer, he realized it wasn't wind, it wasn't mechanical, it was whispering, soft, deliberate, like lips pressed to the metal grates, murmuring just beneath the edge of clarity. The words didn't make sense at first. Just faint sibilants, hints of language caught between syllables. But the longer he listened, the more it began to shape itself. Not into full words, but into names. One of them was his. Jamie reeled back from the vent so fast he knocked over a chair. The whispering didn't stop. It carried on, faint but constant, like it had noticed his reaction and didn't care. Or worse, it was encouraged by it. His name repeated again, slower this time, more drawn out. As if whatever was speaking wanted to savor it. That night, he dragged his mattress into the kitchen, the only room with 2 exits and the fewest vents. He blocked each one with towels, covered them with chairs, and left the lights off. After what happened last night, light was no longer comfort. It had betrayed him, and worse, it had drawn them. At 3:17 a.m., he didn't sleep. He simply waited. The vents began to hiss again, not whispering, not at first. Just a soft exhale like something large was breathing in the walls. Then a scrape, long and slow, metal against metal. Jamie clenched the knife in his hand, his knuckles bloodless. A thump followed, then another. Then, louder, not broken and childish like before. This time it was guttural. Deep, it rumbled through the walls like a growl masked as a chuckle. Jamie didn't breathe, didn't move. The vent beside the fridge trembled, just slightly. A low clicking sound followed. Nails, maybe. Claws. Something skittering just beneath the grate. And then silence. It didn't fade, it snapped. Like someone cutting the sound out of a film reel. No wind. No house settling. No whisper. Just a vacuum of everything. Jamie's ears rang in the absence. And then something spoke, not a whisper, not a laugh, a voice. Clear. Cold. Inside the kitchen. You should have gone when you had the chance. Jamie swung the knife wildly, but the room was empty. The vent covers hadn't moved. The windows were still shut, but the air had changed, thicker, heavier. Like someone had filled the room with smoke he couldn't see. His lungs burned, his chest tightened. The silence twisted around him like a noose. Then the power returned. All at once, the lights snapped on. The fridge buzzed to life. A heater somewhere clicked. Jamie blinked against the brightness. The kitchen was normal again. Too normal. That was when he saw the handprint, pressed into the condensation on the fridge door. Too large to be his. Too long. The fingers reached almost halfway down the panel, stretched as if dragged down the metal. At the center of the palm, a smear of something dark. He stepped closer. Blood, still wet. Jamie backed away, but his foot hit something. A piece of paper. Another note. Folded and placed carefully on the floor where he couldn't have missed it. He crouched and picked it up with trembling hands. This one said, "The walls remember. So do the voices. You'll understand soon." He didn't sleep that night. Didn't even sit. He paced, moving from room to room, checking every door, every vent, every corner for movement. He opened the cabinets, the closets, even inside the oven. Nothing. Just silence again. Until the morning. That was when he found the painting. It hadn't been there before. Of that, he was certain. It hung crooked on the wall in the dining room, a place no one would hang a painting unless they wanted it to be seen. It depicted a woman in a red dress standing at the top of a staircase, one hand on the banister, the other reaching downward toward something just out of frame. Her face had been scratched out, not blurred, removed, ripped through the canvas so violently the frame behind it was visible. Jamie stared at it, something twisting in his gut. The longer he looked, the more detail emerged in the background. A small mirror hanging near her shoulder. A vent at her feet. A shape behind her, blurry and tall. Barely visible in the shadows. He stepped closer. The shape in the background was watching her. He ripped the painting from the wall and turned it over. There, written in red along the canvas's wooden support, was a single line. They listened through mirrors too. Panic erupted in Jamie's chest like a struck match. He ran to the bathroom, covered the mirror with a towel. Did the same in the hallway. In the guest bedroom, anything reflective, glass, chrome, even water, he dumped or covered. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be enough. That evening, the knocking came early. 8:13 p.m. It was gentle at first. A soft tapping on the glass of the front window. Jamie crept close, staying low, knife in hand, but there was nothing outside. Just snow and fog. The knocking came again. From the opposite side of the house. He darted into the study, heart in his throat. Again, nothing. Then, all at once, every window knocked, in perfect unison. A dozen sharp raps from every direction, shaking the glass like a warning. And then, laughter. Low. Female. Not broken like before, not guttural, almost mocking. It echoed through the walls. From room to room. As if the house itself was speaking. Jamie stumbled back, ears ringing, the laughter growing louder, stretching until it didn't even sound human anymore. Then silence. He heard one final whisper right before the air went still. The house is remembering what it was. The next day, Jamie found the vent in the upstairs hallway pried open. Not broken. Opened. Neatly, precisely. As though it had been unscrewed from the inside. Inside it was a crawl space, just wide enough to fit a person. It snaked into the dark, disappearing into the structure of the house itself. Jamie stared into it, flashlight in hand. Unsure what terrified him more, What might be waiting in the dark, or what might no longer be hiding? The smell hit him first, like wet earth and rot. He climbed inside, hands shaking, breath shallow. The walls of the vent were scratched, deep gouges in the wood, as though someone, or something, had been dragging nails through them. Then he saw it, a small room, a hidden chamber inside the walls, just behind the master bedroom. Inside bones, dozens of them, small, children, stacked neatly in the corners, some still wrapped in what remained of cloth or twine. Dolls, decayed and eyeless, littered the floor, and on the wall, written in something dark and dry, was the same phrase over and over: list 10, list 10, list 10. Jamie dropped the flashlight. It clattered to the floor, the beam cutting across the room to land on something in the far corner. A figure, still, crouched, watching. He didn't scream, couldn't. His body went cold. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stared, head cocked to one side. Then it opened its mouth. But instead of a voice, the house spoke for it. Every vent, every wall, every inch of the house filled with one sound: breathing. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was the sound of something that had been starving. Jamie crawled backward, scraping his knees and hands, tearing his skin on rusted nails and broken wood. He fell out of the vent onto the hallway floor, gasping, bleeding, trembling. The vent cover was back in place, nailed shut. He hadn't nailed it. He hadn't even brought tools. And there, beside him on the hallway floor, was another note. This one was different, older, stained, nearly falling apart. It read, "You were the first to ignore the whispers. Now you'll be the last to hear them." That night, Jamie sealed himself in the kitchen again. But no amount of salt, no amount of boards, no knife or light or prayer could stop what was coming. Because at 3:17 a.m., something finally answered back, from inside the vent. Jamie, then silence. Then the mirror across the room, the one he had covered with a towel, slipped its veil, and inside, something stared back. Not a reflection. Not him. Something waiting, watching, smiling. 31 more. By the fourth night, Jamie had forgotten what true silence felt like. The house had taken that from him. Even in daylight, there was always something, an untraceable hum. The soft hiss of breath where there shouldn't be any, the creak of weight shifting on floorboards, untouched by his feet. But what unnerved him the most was the wallpaper. He first noticed it in the upstairs hallway. Just past the vent he now refused to look at directly. The wallpaper had begun to peel. Not dramatically, just small edges lifting away, curling as if teased by invisible fingers. At first, he blamed the cold. The storm had battered the house non-stop, and the insulation was more decorative than useful. But by morning, the curling had grown worse, revealing lines carved deep into the drywall beneath. At first glance, they looked like scratches. Random. Desperate. But Jamie knew better now. Nothing in the house was random. He tore a strip of wallpaper away with a trembling hand. More marks, dozens of them. Each groove etched clean and deep, crossing into each other, forming crude circles and looping symbols like those he had found under the rug on the first night. But these were older. Faded in parts, chipped where moisture had seeped in. There was something else, too. Beneath the symbols, beneath the scratch marks and tears, were words. Not scratched, but painted. Small, looping letters written in dried brown that could have once been read. And though the paint had faded, one word was clear, repeated over and over: "W." Jamie didn't want to understand, but he did. The house wasn't just haunted. It wasn't just cursed. It was layered. A living memory wrapped around something darker, something beneath the wood and brick and bone. It was calling him downward, slowly, methodically, through the dreams, through the notes, through the ever-mounting dread. It wanted him to go back to the place he feared the most, the basement. But Jamie didn't move. He spent that morning peeling wallpaper obsessively. He couldn't stop. Each room revealed more of the same: scratches, symbols, words. Not just W and now, but other things. Nate's, please. warnings. In the guest room, behind an entire wall of stripped paper, he found a full sentence he watches from the spaces we forget to see. That evening, Jamie locked himself in the bathroom, the smallest room in the house, and covered the mirror again. He turned the faucet on to drown out the silence. But even the rush of water couldn't muffle the voice that began to speak through the vent above the sink. This voice wasn't like the others. It was gentle, female, sad. "He makes us speak," it whispered. "We don't want to. But we do. It hurts more when we fight him." Jamie pressed his back to the wall, staring up at the vent. The voice didn't stop. It didn't even pause. "You shouldn't have come here." A long pause. Then, "But it's too late now." He ran. Out of the bathroom, down the stairs, into the cold dark of the living room. The fire had long since gone out. The windows were covered in a thin layer of frost. The silence returned, deeper this time, heavier, like the house was holding its breath. Then he heard it. A knock. Not at the front door. From inside the living room wall. Jamie turned slowly. It came again. A soft, almost polite knock, 3 times in quick succession. He stepped closer, heart in his throat. The wallpaper was moving. It pulsed, just slightly, as though something behind it was breathing against the surface. Then, tearing, a section of wallpaper peeled away on its own, curling upward like burning paper. Beneath it, more scratches, more words. But this time there was a handprint pressed into the drywall itself. Large, jagged, fingers too long with claw-like impressions at the tips. And below it, smeared in something too dark to be old 30. The count was moving. Every night, something happened. Something got closer. Something inside the house grew. The numbers were counting down, and Jamie no longer believed they marked nights. They marked thresholds. Each one chipped away at the walls, at the separation between the house and whatever lived beneath it. And whatever that thing was, it wasn't coming from above. It was rising. He collapsed on the floor, too exhausted to cry, too terrified to speak. He stayed there until darkness overtook the last sliver of day and the shadows regained control. That was when he heard the scratching. It started soft, like the faint scuttle of a mouse. Then louder, scrape, scratch, drag, not in the walls now, not in the vents, not under the floor. From inside the wallpaper, he pressed an ear to the living room wall, every part of him screaming not to. But he couldn't help it. And what he heard turned his blood to ice. Whispers, laughter, and something else, whimpering. Someone was crying behind the wall. Jamie backed away, breathing hard. His foot caught on the rug. He fell, and when he looked up, a piece of wallpaper above him began to bulge. Something was pushing from the inside. A small lump formed first, like a fist pressing against the paper. Then a face, a mouth, open, screaming soundlessly. Jamie scrambled back, but the paper went flat again. No tear, no mark. Just the word that now stood clear across the entire wall. Revealed by the peeling strips, BL Dubbo, he barely slept that night. Every time his eyes closed, he saw that face, pushed tight against the wall, mouth agape in a scream that could only exist in silence. He imagined what it would be like to live in the walls, to be swallowed by the house, forgotten, speaking only through vents and cracks and scribbled notes that no one read until it was far too late. That morning, he tried to escape again. The front door was still sealed, so he went for the back. The lock turned. The door creaked. Cold air rushed in. Hope lit inside him like a spark. But the moment he stepped onto the threshold, everything changed. The snow outside was wrong. Too still. No wind, no falling flakes, no sound. And the trees, he hadn't noticed them before. Dozens of them, all in straight, perfect lines. Black bark, no leaves. And every single one carved with the same symbol he had seen beneath the rug. A circle. Split in two. He stepped back, and the door slammed shut behind him. Locked, sealed again. There was no outside. Not anymore. This house was its own place now, cut off, folded into something else. He stood in the kitchen, shaking, trying to find air that didn't feel used. The vent above the stove rattled. He didn't look at it. Couldn't. Instead, he stared at the note that had somehow appeared on the counter beside the cold kettle. Another folded scrap of yellowed paper. Smaller than the others. He opened it with dead hands. It read, "You're not the first to go mad here. You're just the last one still trying to pretend you haven't." Jamie dropped the paper like it burned him. Because in that moment, in the light of the kitchen, he saw something that turned his bones to ash. The wallpaper on his own skin, his forearm, was peeling. A small edge, just lifting, and beneath it, not skin, scratches, symbols, and the word half-formed, scarred into the flesh beneath "WN." The house wasn't just showing him things. It was turning him into one of them. One of the whispers. One of the forgotten. One of the 34. By the 5th day, Jamie stopped counting time in hours. Time had no meaning in that house anymore. Days blurred into nights with no warning, and the cold light that crept in through the frostbitten windows no longer belonged to the sun. It felt borrowed, dim, metallic, and gray like the breath of something ancient breathing through the clouds. He tried once more to track the sunrise, standing by the largest window for what felt like hours watching. But it never rose. The light simply appeared, dull and wrong, as if the house decided when it should begin and end. He knew by now that he wasn't alone. He hadn't been alone since the first knock. But it wasn't just the thing in the walls anymore, or the voices in the vents. It was something closer. Something that watched him not from the shadows, but from the spaces that shouldn't exist. It wasn't until that morning, if it could even be called morning, that Jamie found the room. The hallway upstairs had always been short. 3 doors. His bedroom, the guest room, and the bathroom at the end. He'd walked it dozens of times. It was narrow, with a crooked floorboard halfway down that squeaked no matter how lightly you stepped. But that day, when Jamie climbed the stairs after hours of sitting still in the kitchen, trying not to breathe too loudly, the hallway wasn't short anymore. It extended, not gradually, not subtly, all at once, like a trick of the eye being undone. He froze at the top step. The floorboard that squeaked was gone. In its place was more hallway, at least 10 feet more, and at the end of it, a door. It shouldn't have been there. He knew this house. Knew it better than he ever wanted to. That door hadn't existed yesterday, or the day before, or any day, but it was there now. Heavy, painted black, no handle. Jamie approached slowly, dread congealing in his stomach. As he got closer, he noticed the air shifted. It grew warmer, not inviting, but stifling. The kind of heat that stuck to your skin like syrup, and beneath it, the scent, sour, rotted fruit mixed with something coppery and wet. He touched the door. It was warm. The moment his fingers made contact, something whispered from behind it. Not a voice, a crowd. Dozens of voices, some muttering, some crying, one laughing. He stepped back, hand shaking. Then the door opened on its own. No creak, no groan, just a silent, slow swing inward. Jamie didn't want to go in, but he did. The room inside was dim, lit only by a flickering ceiling bulb that swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. The walls were lined with mirrors, but not whole ones. Shattered fragments, jagged and nailed to the wood like someone had tried to rebuild a reflection out of broken pieces. In each shard, Jamie saw something different. In one, he was sitting in the attic, staring at nothing, blood dripping from his ears. In another, he was in the basement, his mouth sewn shut. In a third, he wasn't human at all, his skin blackened, hollow, crawling on all fours with eyes that blinked sideways. He stumbled backward, but the door was gone. The hallway, gone. Just walls now, pulsing slightly like they were breathing, like they were alive. Then the lights died. Total darkness. He heard movement, light, rapid footsteps circling him. Then, a voice inches from his ear. "This was never your house," he screamed. Reached out blindly, hit something soft, a face, lips, but no eyes. It hissed and darted back. Then silence again. When the lights returned, Jamie stood alone. The mirrors were gone. So was the door. In their place, a staircase, leading down. But the house only had one basement, didn't it? He descended, unable to stop himself. His legs moved without consent. 1 step, 2. The air grew thicker, the scent stronger. With every footfall, a new sound emerged. Metal chains dragging, distant sobbing. The wet squelch of something crawling through sludge. At the bottom, the room opened wide. It wasn't part of any house. It was a cavern. Rough hewn stone walls, dripping with condensation. Chains hung from the ceiling. Bones scattered the floor. And at the center, a chair. Wooden, stained, occupied. Jamie approached slowly. The figure in the chair was facing away, slumped forward. Then it turned. No face. Just skin stretched tight over a featureless head, like someone had erased its identity. It raised one hand, shaking, pointing at Jamie. And on its chest, carved deep into the skin, was a message: "You brought it back." Jamie staggered. He turned to run. But the stairway was gone. Stone wall. No escape. He screamed until his throat tore, but the room swallowed the sound like it had done it 100 times before. Then the figure stood. It was tall, too tall. Limbs jointed wrong. It moved with the sound of twisting rope. It didn't walk. It folded forward closer, closer, and then darkness. When Jamie woke, he was back in his bed, fully dressed, covered in dirt, and on the wall above him, written in perfect, steady strokes, 29. He wanted to believe it was a dream, but the dirt under his nails and the blood on his sleeves said otherwise. He staggered to the bathroom, washed his hands 3 times, scrubbed his skin raw, but the smell remained, the rot, the copper. When he looked in the mirror, he hadn't covered this one. His reflection was smiling. He wasn't. Behind the reflection, in the mirror's version of the room, something stood in the corner, watching, still, waiting. He turned. Nothing there. But in the mirror, it remained. It raised one finger, pressed it to its mouth. Shh. And then, written on the mirror in breath, he built this house from forgotten souls. Now you live in his memory. The house wasn't growing. It was remembering. And Jamie, he was becoming part of it. Each night, a new memory, a new room, a new version of himself to add to the walls, the vents, the voices. There was no way out. Only down, only deeper. 29 more to go. It began with the clocks, the morning after the room that wasn't there. Jamie woke to the silence of nothing ticking. The hallway clock, an antique pendulum he'd never paid much attention to, had stopped at exactly 3:17. His phone showed the same time, frozen, unresponsive, its screen stuck like a painting. The oven clock, the microwave, the battery, powered alarm in the bedroom, all the same, 3:17. As though time itself had surrendered to the house. He stood in the kitchen, staring at the blinking colon on the microwave. It didn't blink anymore. Just a static, lifeless symbol. He waved his hand in front of it like that would fix something. It didn't. It was 3:17. And somehow it was always 3:17. Jamie pressed his palm against the wall, steadying himself as the floor beneath his feet seemed to tilt slightly. Not with movement, but with perception. The air shimmered, just barely, like heat on a desert road. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and told himself he was imagining it. But when he opened them, he was no longer in the kitchen. He stood in the hallway again. And the hallway was wrong. It had shifted again. Longer, darker. The doors were different. There were more of them now, unpainted, warped with age, and something worse. They lined both sides of the hall, all shut, none of them familiar. At the end of the corridor, the light flickered above a mirror. Not a hanging mirror, a standing one. Tall, framed in black iron, covered in claw marks. Jamie didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. His mind reeled. He hadn't walked here, hadn't even moved. 1 second, he was in the kitchen. The next, in this hallway from nowhere. The house wasn't just shifting. It was folding him into new versions of itself. A hum began, low and vibrating, almost like a swarm of insects under the floorboards. The walls pulsed again. He turned to go back, but the way behind him had vanished. Just wood, seamless, like there had never been anything else but this hallway. The hum grew louder. He approached the mirror. His reflection didn't meet his gaze. It stared past him, eyes wide, mouth agape. Not screaming, warning. Then it pointed. Jamie turned. One of the doors at the far end creaked open. Darkness spilled out, slow and deliberate, like ink spreading through water. From within came the sound of something moving across old carpet. Not footsteps, dragging. He ran. Didn't think. Didn't stop. His legs moved on instinct. Tearing down the hallway that seemed to stretch farther with each stride. The mirror shattered behind him, the sound sharp and wet. Not like glass breaking, like bone splitting open. He crashed through the door at the end and tumbled into the basement. The real one this time. No hallucination. No trick. He knew because it smelled like the truth. Damp. Iron. Rot. He lay there, gasping, shaking, staring up at the low ceiling above the concrete. Something had changed. The room was colder now. The walls sweat. And on them, scribbled in what looked like soot and old blood, were dozens of time stamps. Each one read 317. Each one struck through. Except the last. Still fresh. Still wet. Jamie 317 open end. His body screamed at him to move, to run, to climb the stairs. But the stairs were gone. Where they had been was now a blank wall. Not bricked. Not boarded. Just not there. He wasn't trapped in the basement. The basement wasn't part of the house anymore. Jamie stood slowly. Every muscle in his back and legs burned. The light in the ceiling, the one dusty bulb, flickered with no rhythm. Then it went out. He was alone. But not in silence. There were voices again. Not whispering now. Chanting. Low. Repetitive. One phrase again and again, in a language that felt familiar without being known. And then, laughter. From all sides. He turned, spinning in the dark, knife in hand. But the laughter danced through the room like it knew it couldn't be caught. It wasn't trying to scare him anymore. It was celebrating. A metal sound rang through the air. Chains. Scraping. Then he saw them. Figures in the dark. Not ghosts. Not solid. Shapes. Blurry silhouettes standing in the corners, twitching, mouths too wide, limbs too long. One stepped forward. Its face was Jamie's. Or at least a version of it. Eyes. Hollow. Skin stitched tight around the mouth. And on its forehead, carved deep Ispioki. Jamie ran. He crashed into a wall, fell again, scrambled across the floor in the dark. His hand struck something sharp. A bone. A pile of them. Hundreds. Small. Human. Children's bones. He screamed. But his voice didn't echo. It just stopped, mid-sound, as if the air had choked it. Then came the knock. One loud, from somewhere above. Back in the house. Back in time. Jamie closed his eyes, whispered for it to stop, but the knock came again. And again. Then silence. The air changed, and suddenly, he was back in the kitchen. Knife still in hand, floor clean. No blood, no dust, no bones. The clock 3:17. Again. Still. As if nothing had happened. As if it always was happening. On the counter, a note waited. This one was torn on the edges. Faded. The ink ran. It said, "It doesn't want to kill you. It wants to keep you." He collapsed into a chair, shaking, unable to breathe. He pressed his palms to his eyes and tried to force the images out. The hallway. The reflection. The dark. The face that wasn't his. It was then he noticed the calendar on the wall, still turned to the same page it had been since he arrived. But the date was circled now, not by him. Not in red, in black. March 17. 3017. He stumbled back, chair clattering to the floor. The room swam. His mind flashed through every night, every knock, every note, every scream behind the wallpaper. They weren't just moments. They were rituals. The house wasn't haunted. It was timed. It didn't simply keep souls. It collected them, measured them, aligned them to something far older than blueprints or lumber. Something that worked like a clock, with parts, with pieces. And Jamie, he was just one more gear. He moved through the house in a daze now, hearing music where there wasn't any. Children humming from beneath the stairs. A woman crying behind the bathroom mirror. A man laughing inside the hallway walls. Each voice tied to a door, to a moment, to a second hand ticking forward where time no longer moved. When night fell again, the power went out. Of course it did, and the voice came back. Not from the vents this time. Not from the basement. From inside his own mouth. It whispered words he didn't understand in a voice that wasn't his. Then, when it was over, he opened his hand. There was a new note, pressed into his palm, soaked in sweat, his own handwriting. But he hadn't written it. It said 28, and then you stay. He looked to the ceiling, and smiled. But it wasn't his smile. Jamie didn't remember falling asleep, but he woke to the feeling of his own name being spoken. Not in a dream, not in a shout, but as a whisper traced gently along the base of his skull. He sat up gasping, heart hammering, sweat pooling beneath his shirt, yet the room was freezing cold. Breath fogged in front of him. Every window remained tightly shut, and yet the air carried a breeze that didn't move any curtains. A breeze that didn't come from outside. It came from the walls. And in that breeze, his name. Not screamed, not hissed. Whispered in a voice so close it might have been inside his own head, except he could feel it, on his skin. Jamie. It came again. He knew better now than to answer. The morning light that trickled in had grown even paler, sickly and gray like light filtered through ash, the kind of light that didn't belong to a sun. It wasn't even morning. It just was. And the clocks still blinked 3:17, refusing to budge. He went from room to room, with a heavy feeling pressing on the back of his neck, as if invisible eyes trailed every step. The guest room was colder than usual, and it wasn't until he stepped inside that he realized all the furniture had been rearranged. The bed was now against the opposite wall. The lamp had been turned upside down. The mirror, the one he'd covered, was uncovered again, clean, polished, and in it, a girl stood behind him. Jamie spun, nearly tripping on the rug. Nothing. But in the mirror she remained, barefoot, wet hair clinging to her cheeks, a dress the color of dirty snow. Her lips moved slowly, but made no sound. He stared into her reflection, heart pounding in his throat. Her mouth shaped one word. Listen. His ears rang with static. She raised her hand in the reflection. Her palm was bleeding, symbols carved into her skin, dripping onto the floor. As she extended her fingers, the walls of the room trembled, just slightly, just enough for him to feel. Then she stepped closer in the mirror. Jamie lunged for the sheet and covered it again. When he looked down, the rug at his feet was soaked. He yanked it back. A message carved into the hardwood, still fresh, Nambu Ikanandu Yuernaman. He staggered backward. Who was the girl? The whispers. The house. The voices were no longer vague murmurs in vents and behind walls. They had become coordinated, focused, personal. As if every time Jamie heard them, they heard him too. He didn't notice the front door was open until hours later. There was no sound when it moved. No gust of wind or shift in air pressure. It simply stood there, ajar, the heavy chain dangling, lock broken clean through. Jamie stepped toward it, a mix of hope and fear clawing at his chest. Snow covered the porch, untouched, but there were footprints, bare, small, leading away. He almost followed. But something in the back of his mind told him to look back first. So he did, and saw her, the girl in the mirror, now in the hallway, still barefoot, still bleeding, but she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the attic stairs. Then she pointed. Jamie turned to follow her gaze. The attic door had returned. He'd boarded it, nailed it, sealed it with salt and prayer and fear. It was wide open now. Darkness spilled down the stairs like water, but not ordinary dark. Thick, moving, like it had shape. The girl vanished from the hallway, just gone. No blink, no fade, just not there anymore. And in the silence that followed, he heard something new. Not laughter, not weeping, not chanting. Breathing. Deep, slow, animal. It echoed from the attic stairs, rhythmic and patient, like something waiting. Something that had waited a long time. something that had his name on its tongue. Jamie stepped back, but the front door slammed shut behind him, hard enough to rattle the walls. He jumped and turned, locked again. The chain reset, the keyhole twisted, as if the house had allowed him that glimpse, and now it was done pretending. He moved to the dining room, sat at the table, tried to remember anything before the house. His apartment, his life, a friend's voice, a streetlight, a smell, a sound. Nothing came, not clearly. It was like those memories had been buried under wet leaves, still there somewhere, but fading, damp, cold. Instead, new ones surfaced. A nursery with walls that bled, a hallway that never ended, a door that should never be opened. He shook his head hard enough to make his ears ring. He reached into his pocket for his phone, knowing it wouldn't work, but craving the feel of something real. The screen flickered once, then showed a message. Not a text, not a notification. Just a black screen with white letters. "Do you know who you are yet?" He dropped it. The screen shattered. It didn't matter. Nothing left in that house cared about technology or time or logic. It had gone past that. And so had Jamie. He began hearing them all day now. Whispers from cupboards. Names spoken in the sound of creaking hinges. Scratching from beneath the tub. Breathing through the oven vent. Every voice said the same 3 words, again and again, in dozens of different voices. Male, female, old, young, some distorted, some clear. "We remember you." It drove him into the basement again. He had sworn he'd never go back. But something inside him knew that it didn't matter anymore. It wasn't about choice. It never had been. The door creaked open like it had been waiting. The stairs groaned like they recognized his weight. The air was even colder now, the scent thicker, and something new hung in the air. Charcoal, burnt paper, as if someone had tried to destroy something and failed. On the far wall, where the words had once been scrawled, there was only one thing left now. "While you are a part of Itondo." Jamie sank to the floor. He cried. He didn't know how long. The lights flickered once, then died. The dark didn't scare him anymore. Not because it wasn't terrifying, but because it had become familiar. The whispers began again, louder this time, all around him, chanting now, overlapping, faster, all voices, all saying his name, not one at a time, together. Then they stopped, and a new voice came, different from all the others, lower, closer. Jamie, one word, just that. But it was enough, because it was his voice. He looked into the corner. A shape stepped forward, hunched, burnt, skin sliding from bone like wet cloth. Its face, his face, or what was left of it. It held out its hand, palm up. Inside it was a note. He didn't want to read it. He had to. He took it, unfolded it, and read the same thing written over and over again on every line. "Say your name. Say your name. Say your name." He looked up. The thing wearing his face was gone, but the voices returned, one by one, all whispering the same word now. 27. Jamie no longer recognized his own voice. He tried speaking aloud that morning, if it was morning, which was doubtful, and what came out didn't belong to him. It was hoarse, dry, stretched too tight like it hadn't been used in years. The sound startled him so much he dropped the half-eaten piece of stale bread he'd found in a cabinet and backed away, as if he were choking on something deeper than dust. And maybe he was. Maybe the house had already begun swallowing pieces of him, one word at a time. The whispers hadn't stopped since the basement. They followed him now, trailing through the vents, pressed into the walls, curling around his footsteps no matter where he went. Always the same message, spoken in hundreds of voices, some of which sounded like his own. "Say your name." Say your name. He didn't want to. Not anymore. Because something in him understood now. If he said it, if he gave it voice, something else would take it. The house wasn't hunting him. It was hollowing him. And the final piece it needed was that last thread tying him to who he had once been, his name. Jamie. It had felt so normal once. Now it throbbed in the walls like a heartbeat, echoed through the floors. written in blood behind torn wallpaper, carved into mirrors, scribbled in notes that continued to appear no matter how many he burned. They found ways to return, sometimes folded neatly in his pocket, other times tucked inside books that shouldn't be there. Once, one was stitched into the inside of his sleeve, thread thick and black and pulsing warm like it was alive. He tried writing other names, speaking different ones aloud. But each time, the house groaned in response as though offended by the lie. He tried silence. That was worse. The whispers grew louder, more aggressive, until they weren't just voices, they were screams, piercing and layered, crawling over each other like insects, writhing beneath his skin. It only stopped when he whispered something, anything, to acknowledge them. A word, a sound, a breath. He was unraveling, and the house was pulling the thread. That night, the attic door opened again. No sound, no warning, just open. It seemed to do that now with no regard for effort, as if barriers were becoming a suggestion instead of law. Jamie didn't go up. He didn't need to. Whatever lived up there had started coming down. It was subtle at first. Shadows that didn't move with the light. A silhouette at the top of the stairs that disappeared the second you blinked. Footprints in the dust where no one had walked. But tonight, it escalated. Tonight, it stepped into the hallway. Jamie was in the bathroom when he heard it. Bare footsteps on the wooden floor, slow and deliberate. He froze, hand hovering above the sink, breath caught mid-chest. The footsteps moved closer. No rush, no hesitation. And then it stopped. Right outside the bathroom door. He turned the knob slowly, heart drumming. Opened the door. The hallway was empty. But not silent. Behind him, in the mirror, stood a tall figure draped in black. No face, just a mouth, moving. And in its voice, the voice that was his, came the command, "Say your name." He turned to face it. Nothing was there. But in the mirror, the figure moved closer. He backed into the hallway, stumbling, gasping, every breath catching on the growing weight in his lungs. The lights flickered. The floor beneath him moaned. Then he heard the girl again. From behind the walls, the same girl from the mirror. Her voice soft and cracked like old porcelain. "Don't speak it. Don't give it. Don't let it own you." Jamie spun, his hands pressed to the wall. "Where are you?" he whispered, though part of him didn't want to know. "Gone," she said, "but still here, like you will be, if you give it your name." He dropped to the floor, shaking. His body felt like it wasn't his anymore. His skin tingled, his fingertips numb. His reflection no longer followed his movements in perfect sync. He'd noticed it a day ago, maybe more. Now, it didn't even try to mimic. It watched. At 3:17, the moment that came whether you wanted it or not, everything stopped again. Lights, clocks, sound, breath, and in the stillness came the voice, not whispered, not shouted, declared, "You are Jamie, and you belong to us." The windows shattered all at once, every single one. Glass fell inward, slow as feathers, sharp as razors. Wind screamed through the house, but it wasn't cold air. It was heat, boiling, thick, filled with voices, chanting, laughing, crying. And from the center of the living room, a new door emerged. Not wooden, not metal, flesh. A door made of skin and bone, stitched into the wall with something black and wet, pulsing like a living thing. A handle formed, a tongue, hanging there, limp and red. Jamie stumbled backward, fell onto the broken glass. Blood pooled beneath his hand. The door pulsed and spoke, in his voice, "Say your name, and come through." He screamed and crawled away, his palms slicing open, his breath jagged. Behind him, the door throbbed faster, harder, until it looked like it was going to burst. Then it stilled. Silence again. A note appeared on the wall, burned into the plaster, black and curling. "You've already said it too many times. You've already let us in." His name had become a curse. A key. A crack in the lock that kept it out. Every time he had whispered it to himself in the dark. Every time he'd begged to be spared. Every time he'd cried it like a prayer. He had been unlocking the door. The girl's voice returned once more, distant now, fading. You can't take it back, you can only forget it. The next day, Jamie didn't answer to it, not even in thought. When the whispers came, asking, prodding, breathing his name from under the floor and between the walls, he turned away. He plugged his ears. He hummed nonsense. He broke every mirror he found, even the smallest ones on cutlery, doorknobs, the backs of spoons. The voice grew angry. It became louder, more distorted. Jamie, it hissed through the vents. Say it, or we will. But he didn't. Even when the walls began to bleed again. Even when the lights flickered in unison. Even when the windows turned black, not from night, but from something outside watching in. He didn't say it. Instead, he tore the name out of his journal, every page, every envelope, every letter. He scratched it off walls, burned his license, shattered his ID. All of it, gone. And when he was done, he stood in the hallway, covered in ash and blood, and shouted, "I don't remember!" The house trembled. The walls wailed. The mirrors howled. And somewhere inside the vents, something screamed. But for the first time since he arrived, the voice didn't say his name. It said a number. 26. Jamie found the book under the floorboard in the guest room, hidden beneath a discolored plank that bent slightly when stepped on, like it had grown tired of keeping secrets. He hadn't been looking for anything, just pacing in endless, hopeless loops through the same shrinking rooms, trying to stay ahead of the whispers. But the plank gave way beneath his heel with a muffled groan, and something deep inside him froze. The moment he pulled it loose, he knew he'd uncovered something the house hadn't wanted him to find, at least not yet. The book was small, leather, bound, heavy with moisture, and impossibly warm to the touch, as though it had been hidden inside something alive. There was no title on the cover, no markings. Just a faint imprint of a hand that seemed to shift subtly under the light, as if someone was still reaching out from inside it. He should have burned it, thrown it into the fireplace and walked away. But the moment his fingers closed around it, he felt a stillness fall across the entire house. No creaks, no vents breathing, no whispers, just silence. The kind that wrapped around his spine and squeezed. He opened it. The pages were blank, every single one, except he could feel them screaming. His breath caught in his throat as he flipped faster and faster. Nothing but yellowed paper soaked with the smell of mildew and ink that had faded to invisibility. But he could hear the words, faint and low, not on the page but behind it, scratching from inside the paper, like letters trying to climb out. And then suddenly, on a page near the center, something appeared. One word, scrawled in crimson that shimmered like fresh blood, unright. He didn't understand it. Not at first, but as he held the book closer, hands trembling, he felt the shift. Not in the house, in him. Memories blurred, not painful ones. Not the night terrors or the screams or the shadows that moved on their own. The real ones, the before. Faces, names, streets. A mother's hand. A father's voice. Gone. Jamie staggered back, book clutched to his chest, and stared blankly at the guest room walls. For a terrifying moment, he couldn't remember why he was there, or how long he'd been in the house, or even, what house was this? And then the voices returned, louder than ever. Say it back, say it back, say your name. But the name was fading too. That single word, once so personal, now floated on the edge of thought like a word in a dream you lose the second you wake up. He screamed and threw the book across the room. It didn't hit the wall. It disappeared, vanished midair, swallowed by the air like a stone into water. The moment it vanished, a noise cracked through the house. Wood splintering, glass shattering, metal warping. Every door in the house slammed at once, like a furious child throwing a tantrum. Then laughter, not the broken childlike giggle, not the mocking female voice. This was deeper, older. It filled every space at once, vibrated the floorboards, made Jamie drop to his knees with his hands pressed hard to his ears. And over that thunderous laughter came a new sound, ripping, The wallpaper tore itself from the walls, curling and flapping like it was alive. The mirrors shattered, the windows blew inward, and all at once the house began peeling open. Rooms stretched, hallways twisted, staircases moved. The layout no longer followed logic, no longer obeyed gravity or geometry. The kitchen door now opened into the basement. The bedroom window looked into the fireplace. The attic stairs led down. Time fractured. It was always 3:17. But now it was every 3:17. Every one that had ever existed. Stacked on top of each other like pages in a book, bleeding through, ink smudging one moment into the next. He ran. Or thought he did. His legs moved. His body jolted forward. But the house didn't let him go far. Corridors stretched the farther he moved, like chewing gum pulled to its limit. Rooms he swore he just left were now ahead of him. One door opened into the same space again and again, like walking in circles with no arc. The house was looping him, feeding on the friction between memory and movement. He stopped in what should have been the study, only to find a staircase that went up and down at the same time. He blinked, and it turned into a hallway. Blinked again, and he was standing in the fireplace. He screamed, and it came out muffled, as if the house itself had grown tired of his voice. Then came the notes, hundreds of them, raining from the ceiling, slipping from under doors, sprouting from walls like mold. They covered the floor in seconds, all identical. All with the same words, written in his handwriting, "I am not real." He fell to his knees again, tearing them open on broken wood, grasping at the notes, crumpling them in his fists, shaking his head over and over. "I am real," he whispered. But even his voice didn't believe it anymore. The house laughed again, and this time it sounded like him. Not just his voice. His mind. Repeating thoughts he didn't know he had. "This is what you chose. You opened the door. You said your name." Then silence again. And in that silence, a door. Not flesh this time, not wood, something worse. A door made of mirrors, fragments of every reflection he'd seen since arriving, pieced together into a jagged oval set into the wall like an open wound. As he stepped closer, the images inside the glass began to move. They showed versions of him. One standing in the attic, smiling as fire licked the edges of the room. One walking down the stairs, hand in hand with the girl with the bleeding palm. One hanging from the hallway ceiling. Another curled in the basement, whispering the same phrase on repeat, face blank, eyes black. And then one more, a version that looked just like him, staring back, mouth closed. Still. Then its mouth opened and said, "You're almost ready." Jamie stumbled back. The mirror shattered, and in its place, a number burned into the wall behind the glass. No note, no whisper, just that glowing symbol 25. Not 25 nights left, not 25 warnings, 25 versions, 25 selves. Already written into the house. He hadn't been counting down. He'd been duplicating. Each night, a new Jamie was carved out and stored in the walls. And when the last one arrived, there would be no original left. Just echoes, reflections, whispers. Each saying the name he was no longer allowed to remember. Jamie tried lighting every candle in the house. He found them in drawers, in the basement. Even in the backs of cupboards he hadn't opened since the first week, though now he couldn't remember how long that had been. Time no longer moved, but he did, and so did the house. He walked through its shifting corridors clutching matches and wax, hoping the flicker of flame might ward off whatever shadows slithered just past the corner of his vision. It didn't. The light didn't hold them back. It only seemed to make them pause and watch. He learned quickly that the light didn't reach everywhere anymore. There were patches of air that swallowed it. Whole corners, sometimes entire rooms, where the candle's glow stopped short, caught on invisible barriers. Places where light refused to linger, like it knew something Jamie didn't. He pushed the candle forward once, into one of these lightless hollows. The flame snuffed itself out instantly, not from a breeze, not from lack of fuel, from resistance. He tried again in the hallway near the attic steps, those twisted, warped boards that had once led up and now seemed to stretch sideways into impossible dark. Again, the flame died. This time, the match itself bent, curled inward before it could catch. He dropped it, his breath hitching. The air tasted metallic here, thick and old, like he was breathing inside a lung that hadn't worked in years. Jamie backed away. He didn't run anymore. The house didn't respond well to panic. It liked panic. Fed on it. Whenever he lost control, things moved faster. Rooms collapsed into themselves. Doors vanished. Voices got louder. But when he moved slow, steady, it gave him distance. Not mercy. Just time. Like a spider that wanted its prey to squirm. Still, no matter how slowly he stepped, the darkness followed. That night, the lights didn't flicker. They simply didn't turn on. Jamie flipped every switch in the house. Nothing. Not even static. It was as if electricity had never been invented. He considered the candles again. But something about them now felt wrong. Like they had become invitations instead of protection. He wrapped himself in blankets and sat in the living room with a knife across his lap, facing the hallway, where the last reflection had shattered. The wall still bore the scars, cracks spider-webbed from the spot like veins. The number had faded, but he could feel the next one forming. He sat in silence, waited, listened, and at 3:17, the moment that never passed, never changed, the darkness grew teeth. It began in the far corner, where the shadows met the baseboard. A small shift in the air, a sound like skin peeling away from damp wood. Jamie's body locked. He didn't blink. From the corner, something rose, not fast, not with violence, with purpose. A tall figure, featureless, its body made of absence, like the shape you see in your peripheral vision, but can never quite look at directly. It had no eyes, but he knew it was staring. It stepped forward, and every candle in the house, whether lit or not, melted. Just melted. Wax poured across floors, across counters, dripping from shelves like blood from open wounds. The house groaned in satisfaction. And Jamie, against every rational thought left in his mind, whispered, "What do you want from me?" The thing tilted its head. The darkness behind it rippled, and from that ripple came others, not as tall, smaller. Children, silent, their faces wrong, some blank, some hollow, some painted on, wide with grins that bled into their skin. They stepped around the tall thing and walked toward Jamie, barefoot on broken walks, their mouths moving in perfect unison. He didn't hear sound. He felt it. Where the light won't go, we remember. They stopped inches from him. One child raised a hand. There, carved into the palm, were 3 letters JAM. But the last one had been scratched out. The child smiled, and behind that smile, Jamie saw teeth that weren't meant for any human mouth, flat, overlapping, countless. Then, nothing. They were gone. The room silent again, the wax cold. The knife in his hand bent sideways like wet clay. He screamed, but the sound stayed inside him, and then he heard the footsteps. Not behind him. Above, in the attic, rhythmic, measured, like something pacing, like something waiting for its turn. Jamie climbed the attic steps again, not because he wanted to, because it was time. He didn't remember choosing. He didn't even remember moving. At the top, the door stood wide open, no hinges now, just a black, yawning space. Inside was not an attic. It was a void, a room filled with floating fragments, objects he recognized, barely. A birthday candle, a bus pass, a photograph of someone smiling, their face erased. These were his memories, he knew that. Pieces of himself plucked out and preserved, suspended mid-air like relics in a museum no one visits. The air buzzed with voices, hundreds. Each one whispered one word, over and over. Yours. Jamie stepped into the dark. The attic vanished behind him. There was no floor, no ceiling. Just the floating memories and the endless black, and that feeling. That if he spoke, even once, the last thread holding him together would snap. So he didn't. He reached toward the photo. The smiling face, the one he almost remembered. As his fingers touched it, the voice of the house came again, but not through ears, through bone. Say your name, or lose it forever. He didn't say it. He couldn't say it, because he no longer knew it. The photo crumbled to dust. So did the bus pass, and the candle. One by one, the floating memories disintegrated, until all that remained was Jamie, alone, in a black room, not knowing who he was, and hearing, for the first time in a voice that was not his own, 24. There was a door in the house, now that hadn't been there the day before, though Jamie no longer trusted the days. Time had become as untrustworthy as light, bending itself to the house's will. He found the door at the bottom of the basement stairs, embedded in the far wall where there had once been only stone. It was different from the others. This one was made of bone. Not carved to look like bone, actual bone. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of narrow, pale lengths woven tightly together like the ribs of something enormous. The handle was a blackened vertebra, fused in place and polished smooth from what he could only assume was countless trembling hands gripping it before him. And etched into the bones, dark and deliberate, were words in a language Jamie couldn't read, but felt. Every letter vibrated just below his skin like a migraine turned into scripture. He didn't want to touch it, but he was already reaching, not because he had decided, because the house had. The vertebra, handle turned easily in his palm, warm to the touch, pulsing slightly, like it was alive and eager. As the door creaked open, Jamie half expected a shriek or a rush of air or hands to grab him from the dark. But no, just silence. And the black. Always the black. He stood on the threshold for a full minute, staring into what looked like endless hallway, every inch swallowed by shadow. Then a single light flickered on, not overhead, far ahead, a weak, yellow glow, barely enough to illuminate the shape of a corridor. He stepped through. The door shut behind him. No noise, no breeze, just gone. And the moment it vanished, so did everything else. Walls, floor, light, all gone. Jamie stood in the center of nothing. No gravity, no breath, just presence. He couldn't feel his limbs anymore, couldn't feel his body. It was like the space around him had become water, and he was suspended in it, weightless, timeless, selfless. Then something moved. He didn't see it. He felt it. Not one thing. Thousands. All around him. All watching. The space rippled, and the whispers returned, but not in unison like before. Now they came in layers, like voices stacked on top of each other, each with a different version of him. Some begging. Some angry. Some laughing. Some no longer even human. And all of them saying the same word, open. Then came the lights. One by one in the distance, bulbs flicked on above doorways. Floating doorways suspended in midair, unconnected to anything, like entries drawn into a void. Each one was different. Tall, short, round, cracked, some made of wood, others of glass, one of them pulsating like a throat. But all of them glowed faintly, inviting. He floated toward the nearest one, not by choice, by pull. Something unseen gripped him, drew him forward, weightless, like being dragged by the soul instead of the body. The first door was familiar. Made of white, painted wood with childlike stickers, faded and peeling. A bedroom door. His childhood bedroom. He didn't want to see it. But the door opened, and there he was. A boy, maybe 9 years old, sitting cross-legged on the floor, his back to the door, humming softly. Jamie couldn't place the tune, but the sound of it made his skin crawl. The boy turned slowly, no eyes, just black pits filled with writhing red threads. And when his mouth opened, it was wider than any child's could be. The voice that came out was old, layered, wrong. You gave me your name the first time you were afraid. The door slammed shut. He was pulled to the next. This one iron, rusted, chained across the middle. A prison cell. Inside himself again, older, 30 maybe, sitting at a table, staring down at his own hands. Except his wrists were bound by barbed wire. And something moved under his skin. Little pulses, crawling things. Jamie tried to look away. The version of him at the table looked up. His mouth opened in perfect time with Jamie's heartbeat and said, "Every choice you didn't make led you here." The door vanished. Another opened. A hospital room, a white sheet, a toe tag, and Jamie's name, his full name, typed in crisp letters. Except when he leaned closer, the name blurred. Letters rearranged themselves, flipped, bled, until the tag simply read "you." He staggered back, breathless, except he hadn't been breathing at all, and suddenly he missed it. The air, the weight of lungs, the pull of a body. It had been so long since he'd truly felt alive that the absence now felt like drowning. The lights blinked. The voices returned, now frantic, all whispering different things. Fragments of every moment he doubted himself. Every second he'd felt lost, alone, angry. The house wasn't haunted. The house was him, or what was left. These doors weren't portals. They were memories. Unfolded, deformed, weaponized. The last door was the only one still closed. It stood ahead of him, tall and black, pulsing, wet, made of tongues. They stretched from a single center point like petals, twitching, all whispering his name in different accents, voices, rhythms, all saying it in a way that made it feel alien and obscene. Jamie, over and over, some pleading, some laughing, some spitting it like poison. He floated closer, couldn't help it. And when he reached the door, the tongues stilled. A single note peeled off the wall beside it, hovered in the air like it had waited years. He reached out, took it, unfolded. The handwriting was shaky, childlike his own. It read, "Not all doors open outward. Some open in." The tongues peeled away, the door opened. Jamie screamed, or thought he did, because what was on the other side wasn't a room. It was him, endless, stacked like shelves in a library. Dozens, hundreds, thousands of him, stored like pages in a book, each version twisted slightly, each one frozen mid-moment, one mid-scream, another with his hands covered in blood, one laughing, one crying, one burned, one rotting, a wall of cells, a monument to his failure, and at the center, a throne made of bones, empty, waiting for him. Behind him, the voices fell silent. A final whisper, his own, spoke clearly. 23. Jamie didn't remember stepping back through the door of tongues, but he remembered the way it closed behind him. Slowly, deliberately, like something exhaling a long, satisfied breath, he was in the hallway again, his hallway. Or some version of it. The walls were familiar, but aged far beyond their years. Mold bloomed in sprawling black patterns across the paint, and cracks jagged through the ceiling like veins feeding a dying heart. The wallpaper was gone. The mirrors were gone. Only bare walls now, and a silence that had begun to hum. Not in sound, but in sensation. He didn't speak anymore, hadn't in days. Or had it been weeks? The concept of time slipped further from him with each breath. If he still breathed at all. He walked through the hallway with measured steps, listening to the floorboards groan under his weight. But then he heard another set of footsteps, trailing him by half a beat. He froze. The sound stopped. He took another step, so did they. He spun, heart hammering. Nothing. But the air felt bruised, like someone had just been there. He began to move again, this time slowly, testing. The steps followed, always just behind, not threatening, mimicking, mocking. He rounded the corner into the living room and stopped cold. A man stood by the fireplace. His back was turned, but Jamie knew immediately the figure was him. Same height, same hair, same torn flannel shirt he'd burned 2 nights ago in a panic when it wouldn't stop whispering his name from the pockets. But this version of him was breathing. Long, slow breaths, shoulders rising and falling in rhythm. Jamie stepped forward. The man didn't move, didn't acknowledge him, until Jamie was inches away. Then the figure turned, slow, mechanical, and revealed a face that had no mouth. Just skin stretched smooth across the lower half like clay, and eyes that didn't look at Jamie, but through him. Jamie staggered back, but the thing stepped forward. The floor didn't creak beneath its feet. It didn't walk so much as it slid, as though it were being remembered rather than moving. Then it spoke. Not through the mouth, it had none. But through the walls, through the air. The house became its voice. You left pieces of yourself behind. Now they want to come back. The fireplace roared to life behind it, green and blue flames licking up into a smoke that formed faces, all his, screaming, smiling, begging, grinning. Jamie turned and ran. But the house had shifted again. The doors no longer led where they should. The hallway folded into itself, turning right and right and right again. Trapping him in an infinite spiral of plaster and panic, he passed the same painting 3 times. A warped depiction of a crow with human teeth. The 3rd time, its eyes moved. He ducked into a door and slammed it shut behind him, chest heaving. It was the bathroom, but not his. The tiles were black, the mirror cracked in a spiderweb pattern. The tub was full of water, dark water, moving. Jamie stepped closer and saw his reflection, except it wasn't his face. It was someone older, paler, lips stitched together with rusted wire, eyes blacked out with coal. It raised a hand and pointed behind him. Jamie turned. A new door had appeared, small, child-sized, set into the tile like it had always been there. He knelt, opened it. Inside was a corridor no wider than a crawlspace, dark and rank, the walls damp and slick, and at the end, a light. He crawled. The space grew tighter with every foot. The walls closed in like the throat of some ancient beast. His shoulders scraped. His breath caught. The light didn't get closer. It moved away, always a few feet beyond reach. And then the whispering began again. But this time, it wasn't his name. It was names he didn't recognize, overlapping, endless, thousands, millions, spoken in the same tone he'd once used to beg, to plead, to scream. He stopped crawling, frozen. Those weren't memories. They were echoes of others. Others who had been here before. Others the house had devoured. He reached the light. It wasn't a bulb. It was a window. And through it he saw a room, white, blinding, clean, a table, a chair, and another version of himself, sitting calmly, writing in a notebook with a peaceful look on his face. Jamie reached out to knock on the glass. The other version looked up, smiled, spoke, but Jamie couldn't hear him, only the movement of lips, 2 words, clear, slow. "You're late." The light vanished. He was in the hallway again, his hallway. This time there were no paintings, no cracks, just a single line burned into the wall in block letters, YOU. He fell to his knees, cried without tears, and from deep in the vents came the sound of dozens of voices whispering in unison, 22. The house no longer waited for nightfall to change. It pulsed now, even in the sickly gray that passed for morning. Jamie could feel its breath under the floorboards, warm and wet like the exhale of something that had been buried too long, and was remembering how to wake. Every room he stepped into greeted him like a wound reopening, walls bleeding the shapes of words, ceilings weeping mold, shadows contorting in ways the eye wasn't designed to follow. There were no clean spaces left, no corner untouched. Every inch of the house had begun to watch. He noticed it first in the kitchen. The refrigerator door swung open on its own, not fast, not like a jump scare, slowly, almost politely. Inside, there was no food, only scraps of paper, folded neatly and stacked like cold sandwiches. He took one, unfolded it. His handwriting again, but something was wrong. Too clean, too steady. He hadn't written this, but it was still his. The message read, "You left her in the yellow room." Jamie's blood froze. He didn't know what it meant. Who was her? What yellow room? The house had never had a yellow room. Had it? He turned slowly, scanning the walls, the layout, searching for something that wasn't there before. And then he saw it. A hallway that hadn't existed the day before. Short, narrow, with yellow light spilling from beneath a door at the end. He should have run. But he'd learned that running only took you deeper. So he walked. Every step creaked like the house was whispering secrets beneath his feet. The air thickened. The scent of rot and old flowers crept into his nose. Sickly sweet, like perfume worn by something long dead. He reached the door. The yellow glow seeped around the frame, pulsing slightly. He opened it and found the room. The wallpaper was yellow, sun, faded and torn. There was a bed, a rocking chair, a window that looked out into absolute black, and in the chair, unmoving, sat a figure. She was small, thin, hands folded in her lap. Jamie stepped in, throat tightening. "Hello." The figure stirred. The chair creaked, and then she looked up. Her face was wrong, not mutilated, not monstrous, just off, her eyes too wide, too dry. Her lips moving in slow, deliberate motions like she was mouthing something underwater. He took a step closer. She began to rock. Back and forth. Back and forth. Faster now. And Jamie heard it, not from her lips, but from the walls. A nursery rhyme, one he hadn't heard since he was a child. Soft and broken, round and round. The house will spin, let the memories come back in. He stumbled back. The woman stood, and then she spoke. Clear. Loud. Voice like shattered glass. "You said you'd come back. You left me in the yellow room." Jamie's spine stiffened. He didn't remember her. Didn't want to. But the way she said it, it wasn't a threat. It was heartbreak. She stepped toward him. One hand out. "Say it," she whispered. "Say it like you used to." Jamie opened his mouth. No sound came out. She stopped inches from him, eyes glistening now. "You promised," she said, voice cracking. "You promised you'd never forget me." Then she blinked, and her eyes vanished. Just empty, blinking sockets. She opened her mouth again. But this time, it wasn't her voice. It was his. A perfect echo from another memory, screaming, "I didn't mean to leave her. I didn't know she was still in there!" Jamie fell backward, hitting the wall hard. The room blinked. Once. And when he opened his eyes, the woman was gone. The chair was empty. But the message had returned, carved into the crib that now stood in the corner. "Lao yu left t asiar, ein her yi." He staggered into the hallway, clutching his sides, bile burning the back of his throat. His memories were no longer his own. They were being rewritten, bent, rewired. The house wasn't showing him horrors, it was reminding him. He found a mirror in the hallway, not cracked, perfect, clean. He looked into it and didn't see himself. He saw every version of himself, lined up like mannequins. Each whispering, each mouthing something different, all overlapping into chaos. And then they stopped. And together, they spoke. "You lied." The mirror shattered. Behind it, scratched into the drywall, was another number. Not burned, not inked, just carved, deep and erratic. 21. His reflection no longer followed him after that. It just stood there, smiling. Jamie stopped trying to sleep after the yellow room. Not that he truly slept anymore. What passed for rest in that house felt more like blackouts, where time folded over him like wet cloth and left him gasping on the floor of a room he didn't remember entering. But after what happened, after the woman, after the nursery rhyme, after the mirror that spoke in truths too raw to deny, he realized sleep wasn't just dangerous in this place. It was an invitation. The house had begun to respond to silence. Not to noise, not to light, not even to prayer, but silence. That made it angry. That woke it up. He first noticed it in the bedroom, what used to be his. He had returned to gather clothes, anything warm, anything that still felt like it came from the world outside. But as soon as he stepped through the threshold, the air changed. Dense, damp, like a lung exhaling directly into his face. He said nothing. He moved slowly, reaching for a coat on the floor, and the walls shivered. It was so subtle he almost missed it. A twitch in the wallpaper, a ripple across the ceiling, then a low, vibrating groan, like nails dragging beneath the floorboards. He froze. The coat still clenched in his hand, and then the screaming began. Not a scream from someone in the room. The room itself screamed. The walls shook violently, paint cracking, dust raining from the ceiling like ash. The sound wasn't loud in the way a siren is loud. It was loud in the way an earthquake is felt. It burrowed into his bones, squeezed behind his eyes, rattled something deep and primal. He dropped the coat and staggered back, hands over his ears, but it did nothing. The scream bypassed hearing. It lived in his skull. He ran into the hallway. The sound stopped the moment he crossed the threshold. Silence fell like a trap snapping shut. He panted, heart pounding, staring into the room that now pulsed faintly with heat, like it had burned itself from the inside, or had been burned repeatedly. He tried again, this time whispering as he stepped inside. "Hello." The walls remained still. Okay, I'm here," he said, voice shaking. Nothing moved. Not the ceiling. Not the vents. No scream. Only the feeling of listening. That's when he understood. This room didn't like quiet, because in quiet, it remembered too much. It forced you to speak, to fill it with sound, to drown out what waited in the silence. Not just memories, but echoes that didn't belong to you. And when Jamie fell quiet again, just for a breath, the room shuddered. The windows frosted instantly. The walls screamed once more. This time, in his voice, overlapping versions of himself, all screaming different things. "I didn't forget her. It wasn't supposed to be real. Make it stop. Make it stop. Make it stop." He collapsed against the doorframe, breath catching in shallow sobs. A small piece of paper fluttered past his face. He caught it without thinking. Written on it, not by hand but typed in clean block letters. "Don't let the silence name you." He staggered into the hall again, pressing his back against the door, hands over his mouth to keep from sobbing too loud. But the paper in his hand burned like a warning. The house didn't just want his body. It wanted to label him, to turn him into one of the echoes. And silence was the first step. He passed a mirror later that day. It wasn't his reflection this time. It was the woman from the yellow room, rocking, still whispering the rhyme. Only now her hands cradled something in her lap. Jamie leaned closer. It was his own head, eyes open, mouth parted, but no voice left inside it, just stillness, just silence. The mirror didn't break this time. It melted, pooled onto the floor like silver mercury, and slithered into the walls. And as it disappeared, the hallway lit up briefly with blood, red light, revealing something new. A message scrawled on the wall, visible only for a moment. "When you stop speaking, we start remembering for you." Jamie spent the next hour talking to himself. Anything to keep his voice moving. He recited the names of people he used to know, the address of an apartment he wasn't sure existed anymore, lyrics to songs that made his chest ache. Sometimes he just counted, but the moment he paused, even for breath, he felt it. The eyes, the hum, the anticipation. Then came the room with no door. He hadn't noticed it before because it had never made a sound. Just a blank patch of wall in the western hallway, where the ceiling sagged and the light bulb always flickered too fast to catch detail. But today, it was different. Today, there was writing on the wall. One word etched deep into the plaster: knock. He approached slowly, hand shaking, and knocked 3 times. The wall trembled. And then, like paper peeling off a wet window, the surface folded back. The wall opened, not swinging, not splitting, peeling. And behind it, a room, pitch black, silent. And from that silence came a voice. Not his own, but close. Almost like a stranger who had worn his voice down over the years. The voice said, "This is where you stop speaking." Jamie backed away. But the floor pulled. The wall crept forward. And that room, that silence, reached for him. He screamed. Screamed loud enough to shatter the flickering bulb above him. The room stopped, the wall sealed shut, the word knock faded, and in its place 20, not a countdown anymore. A sentence. A title. A number of versions left before Jamie would be emptied of sound, of identity, of self, until he too would live in the rooms that scream when silence falls. Jamie had stopped dreaming after the first week, or at least he thought he had. Sleep became something else in the house. A forced descent, a quiet surrender. Every time his body dropped into exhaustion, the house pulled him through a slit in the veil and dropped him somewhere he didn't remember walking to. Rooms that weren't there before. corridors that led to themselves. His mind no longer rested. It wandered. It wandered into him. That night, the house gave him a choice. He didn't know it was a dream at first. That was the trick. Everything was too normal. He was lying in bed in the apartment he barely remembered, the one with the drafty windows and chipped blue cabinets. Morning light poured in through the blinds, warm and golden, and the radio on the counter was playing a song he'd forgotten he loved. For a moment, he thought it was real. He touched the blanket. He could feel the fabric, smell coffee from the kitchen, hear a distant city outside, but something was off, too quiet. No car horns, no footsteps above, no hum of the fridge, and then he noticed the door. It was new, wedged between the coat closet and the hallway bathroom, tall, wooden, with a brass knob too polished for an old apartment. He stared at it, gut twisting. This wasn't a memory. This was a message. He approached, reached out. The knob turned on its own. The door creaked open, slowly, deliberately. On the other side wasn't another room. It was him, himself, sitting in a chair in a completely black space. Naked, slouched forward, head down. Jamie stepped inside and the dream warped, bending inward like a collapsing lung. The door slammed behind him. The version of himself in the chair didn't move. He walked closer. "Who are you?" he whispered. The figure raised its head. No eyes, no mouth, but a voice erupted from inside it. Not spoken. Injected straight into Jamie's skull. "You've been dreaming for days. This house was the first dream you never woke from." Jamie staggered back, nearly falling. "No," he said. "I've been awake. I've been walking. I've seen it." The voice cut through again. "The walking is the dream. The rooms are your mind. The house is what's left of you, stacked and looped and swallowed." He collapsed to his knees. No, I felt pain. I bled. And you do in dreams." The figure stood, towering now. Shadows peeled off its back like wings, flapping in absolute silence. It stepped closer, towered over him. "You opened a door you were never supposed to remember." Jamie looked up, trembling. "What door?" The figure didn't answer. It only pointed. Behind it, the space folded open, revealing a narrow hallway built from memories. The wallpaper from his childhood home. The floor from his first apartment. The ceiling fan from the hospital waiting room, where he'd once waited too long to say goodbye. All fused together in one impossible corridor. And at the end, a door. Not physical, not real, but felt as though it had been there since birth, locked inside him. Jamie began to crawl toward it. The figure didn't stop him. It just whispered, "One last time, every time you dream, you get closer." The hallway narrowed the farther he went, forcing him onto elbows, then belly. The space breathed with him, matched his panic. Each inch forward made the door feel larger, closer, alive. Then, the door blinked, not opened, like an eye. He stopped, froze, and behind him he heard laughter, not joyful, not cruel, relieved. Because he was almost there. Because the house had tricked him again. Because even in sleep, he chose to come. He turned to look back. There was no figure now. Only versions of himself, stretched along the walls like shadows burned into plaster. Each one locked in a different moment of terror. One was screaming. One was weeping. One was silent, hand raised as if trying to warn him through a pane of glass. Then they all spoke, in perfect unison. "Wake up." Jamie opened his eyes. He was in the attic. Naked, shivering, blood on his fingertips. A new door had appeared in the far wall, wooden, brass knob, polished, just like the dream. He crawled toward it, every nerve on fire. The knob turned itself, but the door didn't open. Instead, a note slid out from beneath it. Crisp, clean, white. He picked it up, unfolded it. 5 words: "You never actually woke up." The house shuddered. The shadows behind him moved. He turned. The figure from the dream stood in the corner. No mouth, no eyes. But the voice filled the room again. 19. The door creaked. And this time, it opened on its own. Jamie didn't remember walking through the door. He only remembered standing before it, brass knob cold against his fingertips. And then the moment of nothingness that came after, as if the act of crossing the threshold had deleted time itself. 1 second he was touching it, and the next he was somewhere else. Not in a room, not even in the house. Just space, thick and humming, like standing inside a body too large to comprehend. And inside that space, something had started speaking to him. Not aloud, not in words, but in thoughts that weren't his own. The first was simple. You were never alone. Jamie recoiled, stumbling backward though there was no floor. It was like moving through syrup, his body sluggish and uncooperative, pulled in directions that didn't make sense. Up felt like forward. Forward felt like in. All around him, flickers of light, faint impressions, not shapes, not colors, just feelings, brushed against the edges of his perception. Memories, maybe. Echoes. Emotions peeled from lives he didn't recognize. He clutched his head. "Get out of me," he muttered. But the voice responded instantly. "We are not in you. You are in us." That's when he realized the truth wasn't hiding anymore. It didn't need to. The house had taken his name. It had taken his face. Now it was taking his thoughts. And soon it would take his voice. He began to fall. Not downward, inward. Like spiraling into the folds of his own mind. Rooms unfolded in flashes as he passed them: a bathroom full of clocks that ticked backward. A nursery with a mobile of human teeth. A staircase that looped into itself like a MO bias strip, every step taken bringing him back to the one before. All of it now existed behind his eyes, like he had become the house, or the house had become him. Then came the humming, low, droning, not from around him, but inside. A vibration that started in his jaw and crawled behind his eyes like a migraine that could speak. He pressed his hands to his temples and screamed, but the sound didn't escape his throat. It turned inward, swallowed itself. The voice came again. "Don't fight it. Let us speak through you." "No," he choked out, but already he could feel his tongue moving on its own, lips twitching with syllables that didn't belong to any language he'd ever learned. His vocal cords vibrated, first gently, then violently, as words poured from his mouth in whispers and chants and moans. He wasn't talking. He was channeling. Each sound that escaped him built something in the dark. A shape, a presence. It fed on his voice, rising taller, stronger, drawing substance from every syllable. The more he spoke, the less he recognized the voice as his, until, finally, he stopped resisting, just for a breath. And in that breath, it entered. Everything went quiet, not silent. Still, like a thought that had never been formed. Then he blinked. He was back in the house, sitting at the kitchen table. Except the house was different now. Older, heavier, like it had thickened around him. The walls bulged slightly, as if something behind them was pressing against the surface, eager to be let in. The chairs were different. The table taller. The air wet with something alive. Jamie reached for the glass of water on the table. It shattered before he touched it. The shards spelled a word on the floor. "Speak." He covered his mouth with both hands, but the pressure behind his eyes grew. Not pain, a command. He stumbled into the living room, hands over his face, whispering nonsense to drown out whatever it was trying to say. But the house spoke for him, from the walls, from the vents, from the floorboards. His voice, not echoed, duplicated, repeated again and again in perfect unison, "We are almost here." The mirrors returned that night. Dozens of them, standing upright in the hallway, floor to ceiling, stretching endlessly in both directions. Each one reflecting a different version of him, some younger, some older, some disfigured, some weeping, one in flames. But only one, far at the end, stood still, watching him directly. He walked toward it. Each step made the reflections twitch. They screamed without sound. They pounded fists against their glass prisons. The still one, the watcher, smiled. Jamie reached the end, stared into it. This version didn't mimic. It waited. Then lifted a hand and pointed at Jamie's forehead. A single word formed on the glass K. And in that moment, Jamie understood. He wasn't just the victim, he was the invitation. His body, his voice, his mind. All of it had been shaped by the house not to destroy him, but to prepare him. To become a door. And something wanted through. From behind the glass, the reflection stepped forward. The surface rippled like water. Jamie screamed and ran. But every wall was a mirror now. Every surface his face. All speaking in unison 18. The walls had started to breathe. Jamie didn't notice at first. Not with everything else shifting, twisting, whispering around him. But once he did, he couldn't unsee it. Every inch of drywall subtly expanded and contracted in rhythm with his heartbeat. The wallpaper fluttered like skin drawing breath. The baseboards pulsed. The ceiling trembled in perfect sync with every panicked thud in his chest. The house wasn't just alive, it was matching him, learning him, mimicking him, and that realization felt more violating than any scream it had ever given him. He pressed his hand to the wall in the hallway and felt it push back. Not hard, just enough to make it clear it knew he was there. It wanted him to know that it heard every breath, tracked every blink, followed every stutter of his terrified heart like a metronome. He pulled his hand away and backed down the hall, whispering no. No, 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 a door he hadn't seen before opened to his left. Not wide, just a crack. From inside came the sound of a heartbeat, not his. Faster, more erratic, like it was afraid. He opened the door. Inside was a room the size of a closet, windowless, lit only by a bulb swinging from a string above. The walls were covered in mirrors, shattered, angled fragments held together by rusted nails and smeared glue, and in the center stood a hospital gurney. Straps dangled from the sides, bloody, used. A single chair sat beside it, facing inward, as if someone had been keeping vigil. And carved into the floor beneath the gurney, deep enough to warp the wood, still alive, but not alone. Jamie backed away, but the door slammed shut behind him. He turned and saw the figure in the mirror. It wasn't him. Not exactly. The face was thinner, older, bruised. Eyes hollowed from sleeplessness, lips cracked, fingers trembling, chest rising too fast. But it was still him, the him he might become, or already was. The reflection placed its hand on the inside of the mirror, and Jamie felt a sudden pressure on his own chest, like something pressing from the inside. His breathing stopped. The walls around him pulsed faster, too fast, too fast. He stumbled out of the room and collapsed in the hallway, coughing, choking on air that tasted like metal and memory. He pressed his ear to the floor, trying to center himself, trying to listen to anything normal. But the heartbeat was there too. In the wood, the floorboards thumped, not like footsteps, like arteries. The entire house had a pulse now, and it was sensing with his. A voice whispered from the wall beside him. Not through the vent, not from behind, but directly through the drywall. As if the house had grown vocal cords. "You make us real," he screamed and scrambled back, and from the corner of the hallway, a new shape unfurled. A figure made entirely of his past selves, twisting together in a single moving form. One head bore his childhood curls, the next his first beard. Another was burned black but smiled wide, and another had no face at all. The shape walked wrong, lurching side to side like it hadn't yet agreed which version of Jamie was in control. Each time it stepped, the floor beneath it throbbed. Jamie turned and ran, but the house twisted again. The hallway folded. He stumbled into the living room, except now the furniture was fused into the walls, sunken and pulsing like they'd been absorbed. The armchair beat like a second heart. The television screen showed only static, but the static moved in the shape of his silhouette. He yelled, "Stop! I'm not part of you!" The static cleared for just 1 second, and on the screen he saw himself, in the attic, alone, whispering, "Let me in." "The screen," Jamie said. Then the screen shattered inward, spraying glass like splinters of thought. From the shards, a number rose in blood. 17. He backed into the corner, the only place that didn't move, that didn't breathe. Until it did. The wall behind him curved. The wallpaper stretched. And then, a voice came from inside his skull. Not the house's. His own. But it didn't belong to his present self. It was a memory, a moment, a whisper from years ago. Dragged from a forgotten night, when he first stood in front of the attic and thought, "Don't open that door." And now the thought was whispering back to him. "You already did." He looked at his hands. They were bruised, splinters embedded deep in the skin. Attic door splinters. Jamie hadn't opened it once. He'd opened it dozens of times. Each version of him, each echo, each pulse. Each one feeding the house more of him. The heartbeat behind the walls doubled, tripled. The chandelier swung like a pendulum counting down. And somewhere in the ceiling above, something breathed in time with his thoughts. 17, the house exhaled, and the walls began to close. Jamie no longer trusted what his mind gave him. Thoughts came uninvited now, fragments that didn't feel earned, like memories injected through a hole he couldn't see. The house was inside him, and worse, it had learned to speak through him. Sometimes, in the quiet, his mouth would move without permission. Sometimes he'd wake with his fingers writing on the wall, words he didn't recognize until later. The worst was the voice. It didn't sound like his, not anymore. It was softer, calmer, like someone impersonating him with terrifying accuracy. It started that morning, or what passed for morning, when he opened his eyes and realized he was in a room he didn't remember entering. Not the attic, not the basement, something in between. The walls were raw wood, beams curved like ribs, nails still jutting out in chaotic rows. There were no windows, just a single chair in the middle, and a mirror the size of a door leaning against one wall. His name was etched into the floor in dust, over and over, as if someone, or something, had practiced writing it. He stood slowly. Every movement made the boards beneath his feet groan like they were tired of holding him up. He reached for the mirror, not because he wanted to, but because the house wanted him to. There was a rhythm now, a beat behind every decision. He could feel the story pulling him forward like a leash made of thought. The mirror didn't show him. Not fully. It showed his face, but behind his face, someone else. A second shadow, moving out of sync. It tilted its head, smiled, and said in his voice, "Remember this room." He recoiled, heart stuttering. "I don't," he said aloud. But the voice, his voice, answered, "You will." And suddenly it was all back. Too fast. The smell of gasoline. The screaming. The match in his hand. Not the house, but another house. A memory long buried under self-preservation. He'd burned something. No, someone. A person he was supposed to care for. Someone whose face now refused to fully form in his mind. Blurred like a censored dream. He dropped to his knees, fingers clawing at the wooden floor. "I didn't," he gasped. "I didn't mean to." But the voice replied gently, almost affectionately. "That's not what matters." He tried to stand, but the room shifted around him, folding, warping, pulling at its corners like it was made of paper. He was suddenly outside the memory, standing in front of a door he didn't remember opening, but already knew what was behind. He opened it anyway, and stepped into the fire. Not metaphorically. Real fire. The room beyond burned, slow and surreal, flames crawling up the walls like they'd been starved of oxygen too long. In the center was a crib, charred, empty. Over it hung a mobile, made not of toys but keys. 17 of them, all identical, all spinning slowly. He walked toward it, face wet with heat, skin blistering but somehow not breaking. He reached out. The mobile stopped. One key clicked. The sound shot through him like a lightning strike to the brain. Suddenly the fire was gone, and he stood in a room filled with doors. Hundreds, each with a name burned into the wood. Some he recognized. Childhood friends, teachers, strangers. But most were blank. He found one marked Jamie, touched it, and heard everything. All the versions, all the fragments, every lie he told himself, every secret the house had stored for him. They came back in a roar of clarity. The attic wasn't a room. It was a vault. The fire wasn't an accident. It was a purge. The mirrors didn't reflect. They remembered. He stumbled back, clutching his chest, voice choking with truth he'd spent a lifetime forgetting. The walls whispered together now, louder than ever. "You are the door." And suddenly, he understood. The house didn't want him to die. It wanted him to remember, because memory gave shape to what came next. Memory built the house, and forgetting fed it. He looked down. A number had been etched into the skin of his forearm while he stood frozen. He hadn't felt it. But it was there, blood-crusted around each digit. 16, the voice returned again, quieter this time, as if standing just behind his eardrum. One door for every truth, one truth for every scream. And with that, every door in the room creaked open. Just enough to let out the sound of hundreds of breaths, all in his voice. Jamie had begun to understand the most dangerous part of the house wasn't the violence, or the shadows, or even the shifting walls. It was recognition. Every time he spoke aloud, every time he answered, it heard him. It learned him. That's what the rooms wanted. Not just his body, but his agreement. His voice. The part of him that said, "Yes, this is real." Because when he named the horror, it grew teeth. And worse, it grew closer. The corridor he found himself in now didn't look like any part of the house he remembered. It was narrow, suffocating, built of stone instead of wood. The air was still and dry, thick with the smell of dust and something sweet underneath, like dried blood hidden under perfume. No light came from above, but the entire hall glowed faintly, as though illuminated by memory alone. The silence was different here. It wasn't passive. It waited. At the far end of the corridor, a room pulsed with sound. Not screaming, not breathing, but speaking. Over and over again. One voice, familiar. Too familiar, his own. Jamie stepped closer, barefoot on the cold stone, each footfall swallowed by the thick air. As he approached, the words grew clearer. "Jamie," the voice said gently. "Are you ready to tell the truth now?" He paused. The door to the room was ajar. Not open, just enough for the words to slide through. The voice continued, always calm, always patient. "Someone's waiting in here. Someone who remembers what you won't." He should have turned around, but he pushed the door. The room inside was small, circular, lit only by a single hanging light bulb that swayed slowly, though there was no wind. And in the middle of the room sat a chair, occupied by a figure wrapped in cloth from head to toe. Gauze, gray with age, layers upon layers of it. The figure was slumped but breathing, a slow rise and fall beneath the wrappings. On its chest, someone had drawn a mouth, a crude, smiling one in black ink, and as the bulb swayed, the smile seemed to move. Jamie took a step forward. The figure's head twitched. "Who are you?" Jamie whispered. The mouth on its chest laughed, not a cruel sound. Worse. A familiar one. It was his laugh. The figure raised its hand and pointed at the wall. Jamie turned. There were photos. Dozens of them. Taped, nailed, and burned into the stone. Every one of them featured him. Different versions, at different ages, in different rooms of the house. In some, he was sleeping. In others, staring directly into the lens with hollow eyes. One showed him lying motionless in a tub filled with mirror shards. Another, him at the attic door, holding a match. They weren't photographs. They were recordings of memory. The voice returned, now not just from the figure, but from the air, from the walls, from the ceiling itself. "You kept talking, Jamie. Even when you thought no one was listening. You gave us everything." Jamie clenched his fists. "What do you want from me?" The gauze, wrapped figure stood. It was taller than it seemed, much taller. And it moved with the weight of something long buried, like a secret stepping into the light. It lifted one hand and began peeling away the gauze, layer by layer, slow, careful, as though it knew he wouldn't be able to look away. Jamie didn't move, didn't breathe. The last layer fell. The face beneath was his own, but not just a reflection. It was his face, preserved, perfect, unblinking, unfeeling. He reached up to touch his own face, and the copy mirrored him exactly. Then it opened its mouth. A deep, echoing voice spilled out, filled with distortion, like the sound of his thoughts played through broken speakers. This is who you were before the house. This is what you forgot. Jamie stumbled back, shaking. No, I never. The mouth moved again. You talked about the rooms before you ever walked into them. You dreamed of this place. You gave it a name before it had walls. You made it real. The room began to shake. Photos tore from the walls. The bulb above swung violently, casting fractured shadows in all directions. And the figure with his face lunged forward. But not to attack. To whisper. 16 voices are already inside. Yours was the first. Now it's the loudest. Jamie screamed. The floor cracked. And from beneath the stone, voices erupted, chanting his name, over and over, in versions too distorted to recognize. He clawed his way to the door and threw it open, stumbling into a hallway that wasn't there before. Behind him, the figure stood in the doorway, smiling, saying nothing. But the voice still whispered inside his chest, 15. And the walls, they whispered with him. There was a hallway that Jamie had passed a dozen times before, quiet, unassuming, lined with blank picture frames. He never gave it attention. The mind learns to filter repetition, to ignore the things that do not change. But this time, the hallway had moved. Not physically. Jamie would have noticed that. No, the shift was something stranger. The hallway had inched closer, as if it had been waiting for him to notice, waiting for him to be afraid enough to finally step inside. There was a noise coming from it now. Not a voice, not footsteps, breathing. Not loud, just present. As though someone, or something, had been standing just beyond the edge of his hearing, waiting for him to stop pretending the hallway didn't exist. And now that he had, it was ready. He stepped in. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the light changed. The rest of the house dimmed behind him, fading into a deep, rotting gray. The frames on the walls, once empty, began to fill. Not photographs, not sketches, but glimpses of things he remembered wrong. Of rooms that didn't look like how they were supposed to. Of people whose faces were blurred just enough to make him question if they were real or if he had invented them out of guilt. One frame stopped him cold. It showed his front door, the one from his apartment, the one he hadn't seen since the day this all began. In the frame, the door was cracked open. A figure stood behind it, not stepping through, just waiting. He stared into the image, throat dry, trying to blink the illusion away. But the figure turned its head inside the frame and looked at him. Jamie jerked back, heart pounding. The frame went black. He moved faster now, ignoring the rest, until he reached the end of the hallway, where the carpet gave way to splintered hardwood, and the air turned hot, dense, like it had been trapped for centuries. A single door waited there, ancient, arched, wrong. It looked like it had been built not for entering, but for locking something in. No handle, no lock, just a small plaque bolted above it, scrawled with one word in cracked brass, DENIL. Jamie stood there for what felt like hours, unsure whether the door wanted him to open it, or whether it was daring him not to. Behind it, the breathing grew louder, closer, but there were no footsteps, no movement, only anticipation. He turned to leave. The hallway had disappeared. Only the door remained behind him now, like a final choice. Then came the voice again, his own, but not spoken. Felt. It only opens when you pretend it isn't there. Jamie squeezed his eyes shut. It's not real. This is just the house twisting again. It's not real. The wood creaked. He turned away. This isn't happening. A low groan vibrated from the walls, and slowly, painfully, the door opened. Inside, there was darkness. Not the absence of light, the absence of being. It wasn't a room. It was a reservoir. Jamie stood on the edge and looked down. A staircase spiraled into nothing. But before he could step back, the voice came again. Clear. You've been here before. You walked away, and we let you. But not this time. A hand reached from the void. Not grotesque. Not monstrous, it looked like his hand. Same scars. Same shape. It touched his chest with 2 fingers. And he remembered everything. All of it. Every visit to the attic. Every match struck. Every room ignored. The girl in the yellow room. The person in the fire. The lies he told the world. And himself. The house hadn't stolen his past. It had been keeping it. Waiting for him to be ready. Jamie screamed. The void screamed back. And from somewhere below, the number rose, burned into his chest without flame. 14, he fell to his knees. And the door slowly began to close. Not to keep something out, but to let the memory stay inside. The house had grown quiet again, but it wasn't peace. It was patience. The kind of silence you hear just before something awful breathes your name. Jamie no longer trusted stillness. He could feel the house shifting beneath its surface, not with noise or movement, but with awareness. It was thinking. Or worse, remembering. And it was remembering through him. Every hallway he passed now felt older than the one before. Not just dusty or decayed, ancient. Walls warped by weightless time, corners that seemed to drag with the gravity of forgotten things. The wallpaper peeled in patterns that mimicked veins. Nails stuck out like the bones of fingers, trying to claw their way back into the world. And the pictures. Oh, the pictures. They had returned in full force. Not blank anymore. Not blurry. Each frame now showed a single moment from Jamie's life, but wrong. They'd been twisted just enough to create doubt. His mother smiling, but with teeth missing in the wrong places. His younger self at a birthday party he never had, face frozen in a grin too wide, cake molded with worms. There was one with his hand reaching for something in a mirror, but nothing on the other side reflected it. The message was simple. You've been forgetting things that never stopped happening. He reached the staircase and found that it now descended into a basement that hadn't existed the day before. It was carved from stone, steps worn down by footprints that didn't belong to any version of him he remembered. A low glow pulsed from below, not like light, but like memory bleeding upward. He stood at the top, trembling, and the whisper came, not from the house, not from his thoughts, but from beneath his feet. A child's voice, high and uncertain, "Don't forget me again." His legs moved on their own, down the stairs, deeper. Each step felt longer than the last, as if the descent was stretching space around him. The walls wept with moisture, and sometimes he thought he saw shapes in the stone, faces, bones, fingers frozen mid-scratch, mouths caught in a scream they never finished. At the bottom, a room that didn't fit. It was too wide, too tall, and in the center, a single bed. Small, iron-framed, a child's bed, covered in sheets patterned with moons and stars, the kind you buy when your kid is afraid of the dark. Jamie approached slowly. The air was thick, warm, familiar, and there, curled up beneath the blanket, was the shape of a child. Sleeping, breathing softly, and even before he touched the edge of the bed, he knew the name. Even though he had never said it aloud, he pulled back the blanket. It was him, as a child, asleep, peaceful, unaware. The boy stirred but didn't wake. Then his lips parted, and in a voice Jamie hadn't heard since he was 10, he whispered, "You promised you'd never forget this room." Jamie staggered back. The room began to hum, not loud, but low and constant, like the vibration of guilt pressed against the walls. Symbols etched themselves into the stone, memories he couldn't deny. The first time he lied about the bruises. The night he locked the door and turned up the radio to drown out the screaming. The closet where he hid when someone came home drunk. All the things he told himself weren't real. The house remembered for him. The boy sat up slowly, eyes still closed, and pointed to the wall. Jamie turned. There was a mirror now, but instead of reflecting the room, it reflected a long, narrow hallway lined with doors that looked like his childhood bedroom. Each one had something scratched into the wood. He stepped closer to the mirror. The image zoomed. Each door bore the name of a different memory. some painful, some impossible. One door read th timou farago duio did. Another thnht samani ils paid fararcnce. He looked back at the boy. The child version of him had vanished. Only the bed remained, empty, sheets still warm. Jamie screamed, but no sound escaped. Instead, the walls answered for him. With his voice, layered and multiplied and cracked with age, you cannot bury what you are built from. The mirror cracked, a line down the middle, then another, and through the breaks, Jamie could see himself, present-day Jamie, strapped to the iron bed, mouth covered, eyes wide, while something stood over him with a hand on his forehead, not hurting him, reading him. The mirror burst. The stone walls screamed. And when he fell to his knees, he saw the number again, carved into the back of his hand, deep and fresh, blood still bubbling from the wound. 13. The house no longer needed to search for his memories. It had found the source. And now it was rebuilding him from everything he wanted to forget. Jamie had stopped calling out days ago. Names, cries for help, even his own. None of it mattered now. Words had power in this place. Not in the way stories say they do, not like spells or prayers. Here words opened things. They invited. They marked. They claimed. Every time he spoke, the house remembered something else. Every time he whispered, something listened. And now, he didn't trust even the silence, because it had started to respond. The hallway he wandered into was wrong. Not unfamiliar. Wrong. The floor was slanted, just enough to feel off balance. The doors were too narrow, too tall, like stretched versions of themselves. The light was cold, not just dim, but lifeless, as though the bulbs were filled with shadow instead of glow. Something had shifted. Not the structure, the intention. The house wasn't just reacting anymore. It was waiting, and then the wall exhaled. Not the whole wall. Just a spot, a patch of wallpaper near his shoulder ballooned outward, skin tight and damp. It pulsed once, then again, then, slowly, sickeningly, it split. Not a crack. A mouth. Lips formed in the plaster, cracked. Dry. They quivered for a moment, trembling as though afraid to speak. Then they did, in his voice. Jamie. He froze. The sound wasn't just mimicry, it was perfect. Every syllable, every breath. The way his name sounded when he was a child, uncertain, soft, forgotten. He took a step back, the mouth stretched wider. Jamie, Jamie, Jamie. Each repetition grew louder, sharper, not angry, desperate, like it was choking on his name, trying to spit it out before it burned. Then the voice changed. Different inflections, different accents, different people. Jamie, said a mother's voice. Jamie growled something inhuman. Jamie, said a voice he hadn't heard since a funeral, one he had buried along with someone else's guilt. The mouth began to peel wider, teeth forming behind the lips, crooked, yellow. Familiar, it smiled, and whispered, I remember when you killed me. Jamie staggered back. I didn't, but he stopped himself. No, he would not speak. He bit down on the words as they clawed up his throat. The mouth giggled. That same giggle echoed through the hallway, from other walls, now opening their own mouths, their own voices, all in his tone. You forget so much, but we forget nothing. He turned to run, but the hallway twisted. The floor beneath his feet pulsed like a heartbeat. Every door around him slammed shut except one. A red one, not painted red, stained. The mouth on the original wall called again, voice shrill now. High with excitement. It's time to confess. He didn't want to open that door. But the hallway bent toward it, like a throat swallowing him whole. With each step, the light dimmed. The air grew thicker. He opened the door without choosing to. Inside was a bathroom, but not any he remembered. Just white tile, endless white tile, walls, floor, ceiling, all the same. Except for the far wall, which was covered, top to bottom, with hundreds of tiny mouths, each one murmuring, some sobbing, some laughing, all speaking at once. One mouth, center of the wall, grew larger as he approached. Unlike the others, this one wasn't chanting. It was waiting, silent. Lips curled in a smile, not of joy, but knowing. He didn't want to listen, but he stepped closer. The mouth opened wide and screamed. A single, deafening note that wasn't sound, it was memory. The scream echoed inside his bones. He felt it more than heard it. A pressure behind his eyes, forcing out images he didn't want to see. The lighter in his hand. The pleading voice behind the door. The moment of stillness after the flame caught. And the sick, cowardly relief that followed. The mouth whispered once more. "We never wanted justice, Jamie. We wanted you to say it." And with that, the room fell silent. Every mouth closed at once. The tiles bled from the seams. And on the mirror above the sink, which hadn't been there before, his reflection carved the number into its own forehead with a shard of glass. 12. Jamie turned and ran. And as he fled the room, the mouths all reopened and began to chant his name in unison. Jamie's lungs felt smaller now. Not just because of the constant weight in the air or the way the house seemed to tighten around him, but because his breaths had stopped being his. Each inhale came with hesitation. Each exhale felt like a borrowed rhythm. He'd caught himself mimicking sounds the house made. Soft whispers, uneven footsteps, a cough that wasn't his but escaped his mouth anyway. The house wasn't just closing in, it was taking over. And now, it was unearthing something he had worked his entire life to bury. It started in the bedroom, or what resembled one. The bed was wrong, too wide, too low, too sunken. The pillows moved as if they were breathing. There was no light source, yet everything was dimly visible. Cast in a shade of gray that dulled his skin, his hands, even his thoughts. But what unsettled him most was the painting on the far wall. He hadn't noticed it at first, maybe because it wasn't there until he did. It showed a boy standing in a field at dusk, his back to the viewer, facing something large and burning in the distance. The boy's shadow stretched impossibly long behind him, and as Jamie stared, he realized why the shape felt familiar. The shadow wasn't the boy's, it was his own. This room, this painting, wasn't just a symbol. It was truth, preserved without his permission. He stepped closer and found that the brushstrokes weren't paint. They were scratches. Dozens of tiny claw marks, like someone had tried to etch the scene into the canvas using broken nails. The longer he stared, the more he remembered that field. The smell of scorched dirt, the way the heat had wrapped around his body, warm, not painful, and the voice that had whispered in his ear, long before the house ever spoke. "Walk away now, and it'll be like it never happened." He had, and it had, until now. The bed groaned behind him. He turned. A figure sat there now, not sudden, not abrupt, but inevitable, as though it had always been there, waiting for him to notice. Draped in tattered fabric that looked soaked through with smoke and time, the figure sat motionless, hands folded on its lap, face hidden beneath a veil too dark to see through. Jamie's mouth went dry. He didn't need to ask who it was. The room knew he remembered. Still, the figure spoke, a voice that sounded tired, rusted, but familiar. "You didn't bury me. You buried the part of you that watched." Jamie's knees buckled. "I tried to forget. I was a kid. I didn't know what you knew." The veil lifted, but there was no face beneath it. Just a mirror, and in the reflection, Jamie saw himself at 9 years old, standing outside the field with a lit match in one hand, and his father's voice echoing in his mind, telling him to be brave, to be strong, to keep secrets. But there was more now. Something new. Another presence standing behind the boy in the mirror, tall, featureless, watching. Jamie stepped back, heart hammering. The figure didn't move, but the room began to shrink. Walls tightened. The floor creaked with every memory reasserting itself. The painting caught fire without flame, the canvas curling and blackening in silence. The mirror pulsed. "Say what you saw." Jamie shook his head. No, it's not mine. I didn't do it." The mirror cracked. "Say it." "I didn't light it." The ceiling groaned. "Say it." "I watched!" His voice cracked into the stillness, echoed by silence so sharp it sliced through his ears. He dropped to the ground, hands over his head, and the figure stood, towering now, veil torn, revealing not a mirror anymore, but a face he'd tried to forget. A girl's face, eyes wide with betrayal, her mouth moving without sound. Screaming for him to do something, but he hadn't. He'd run. The room responded. The walls bled the word over and over, carved into every surface like a chant. You watched. You left. You buried. He stumbled out the door, back into the hallway, but it wasn't the same house anymore. It had changed. The wallpaper had turned to soot. The floors were scorched. The lights flickered in and out like memory itself. And behind him, from the room he had just escaped, came the quiet, unmistakable sound of someone crying. Not loudly, but enough to know they still hadn't forgiven him. He looked at his arm. The number was already there, dark and new. 11, he didn't carve it. The house did, because now it remembered exactly what he had tried to forget. Jamie hadn't heard the house breathe in hours. That should have calmed him. Instead, it made his skin crawl. The quiet was too clean, too deliberate. Like the calm that settles in a theater just before the curtain lifts, or the moment between a question and the lie you're about to tell. The walls didn't pulse. The lights didn't flicker. Even the floor stopped groaning. It felt like the house was holding its breath. Not because it was dying, but because it was listening. He walked slowly, barefoot across cold tile. The hallway was unfamiliar, but not in a visual way. It felt wrong in the bones. The walls were concrete now, unfinished and raw, smeared with handprints too small to belong to adults. The doors were all closed, each one identical, white, flat, no handles, no hinges. Just flush with the wall, as though they weren't meant to open. Just exist, like scars. He passed 12 of them before one pulsed. Only once. A small, subtle shudder, as though something behind it had stirred at the sound of his steps. Jamie stopped, waited. The air held its breath again. Then, almost imperceptibly, the door cracked open. Just enough, just for him. He didn't want to look inside, but not looking made it worse. He stepped forward. Inside was a room without corners. A circle of white walls that curved up into blackness. A dome. There was no furniture, no smell, no temperature. Just space. In the center a chair, wooden, familiar. And in that chair sat a woman. She wasn't bound. She wasn't injured. She was waiting, head bowed, hands resting on her lap. Jamie's stomach dropped before he even registered why. He knew that posture. He'd seen it once before. On the night he stayed silent, while someone else took the blame for something he never had the courage to admit. That memory had been small for years, tucked behind bigger, louder regrets. But now it stood at the center of this room, as real and still as the woman in the chair. He approached slowly. "Do I know you?" he asked. The woman didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. But the room did. It pulsed, walls rippling like breath through skin. And then she spoke, without lifting her head, without parting her lips. Her voice was inside his thoughts, filling them completely, drowning out every other sound in the world. "You know what you forgot, and you know what you let happen because forgetting made it easier." Jamie wanted to step back, but the floor was gone behind him. There was only forward now. The woman raised her head slowly. Her face wasn't horrifying, it was kind. Familiar in a way that made him feel small, like he'd failed her before even knowing who she was. And then he saw it, the mark on her neck. A small, red imprint shaped like a hand, his hand. And just like that, it hit him. Not a memory, a recognition. He hadn't pushed her. But he hadn't pulled her back either. She had fallen because he'd been frozen. A witness. A coward. The room responded to the clarity, vibrating with invisible sound. A sharp hum like piano wire pulled too tight. And then the woman stood. Not to accuse him, not to punish. Just to show him the thing he still refused to say. He tried to turn away. She followed. No footsteps. Just presence. He pressed his back to the wall. She placed a hand on his chest. Warm, human, real. and whispered the truth. You watched me fall and waited until no one saw you. Jamie gasped. He opened his mouth to speak, but the house spoke first. From every inch of the wall, his voice, but not his words. It was silence that killed her. The lights above shattered, the dome cracked, and Jamie dropped to the floor as memory crashed around him like falling glass. When he opened his eyes, the woman was gone, but in her place stood the number, not written, branded. Across the floor, glowing in soft red, 10 rooms, 10 memories. 10 lies peeled back until only truth remained. The silence had been patient, and now it was finally speaking with his voice. Jamie had stopped asking questions. The house didn't need them anymore. Every time he thought about something, tried to make sense of where he was, how long he'd been here, or who he used to be, something answered. Not aloud, not directly, but through doors that opened just as the doubt formed, through walls that suddenly bled scenes from moments he hadn't dared to recall in years. The house didn't wait for his voice now. It anticipated it. It filled the silence with responses to questions he hadn't had the courage to say out loud. The corridor before him curved unnaturally, like it had been pulled taut and twisted at both ends. Each wall was lined with windows, too high to see through, too small to climb, but they were there, pulsing with faint movement behind the glass. Shapes shifted in the fogged panes, some still, some twitching. One window was fogged with breath, as if someone on the other side had only just stopped watching him. Jamie turned to face it. It cleared. His own reflection stared back at him, but older, more tired, with a bloodied rag tied around one hand, and the other pressed to a part of the wall Jamie hadn't touched yet. Then the reflection whispered, "You're not asking the right question." Jamie blinked, and the image was gone. He stood alone, but no longer cold. The hallway began to warm unnaturally, air thickening like breath in a sealed box. The walls groaned, not loud, but expectant. The kind of sound someone makes when they already know you're about to confess. A door opened at the end of the corridor, slowly. Not pulled, not pushed, just parted like flesh under pressure. Inside another room he recognized but couldn't name. A classroom, empty save for one desk, one chair, one chalkboard. On it, in neat handwriting, "What is the cost of silence?" The chalk shattered on the floor. Jamie approached, pulse rising. He sat in the desk without thinking. The lights above buzzed once, and then a projector flickered to life from a ceiling beam. Grainy footage began to play on the blackboard. No sound, just black and white images of him, younger, sitting in a therapist's office, motionless, arms folded, mouth sealed. He remembered this. He remembered the offer, the file they had, the questions they asked, and how he gave them nothing. Not because he was lying, but because silence made everything easier to deny. The reel switched scenes. Now a basement. His father pacing. A girl sobbing behind a door. And him, watching, holding a key. The only one. He didn't move, didn't help, didn't stop it. Because he told himself he wasn't the one hurting her. And that was enough. The projector clicked off. The board now read, "It is never enough." He stood shaking and turned to find a figure sitting at the teacher's desk. Not there before. Not breathing, but watching. The figure leaned forward, resting its arms on the desk, revealing hands identical to his, scar for scar, freckle for freckle. And then it spoke. Not aloud, but through Jamie's own lips. "You didn't lie. You chose to let the truth rot in a room no one opened." The lights exploded. The classroom shifted. Desks vanished. Windows slammed shut with no wind. And Jamie found himself once again in a hallway, but this time it was him opening the doors before they could appear. His thoughts carved paths into the architecture. Every regret became a step forward. Every memory peeled from denial shaped the corridor ahead. He was building the house now, with every piece of truth he had once buried. And behind him, far down the corridor, something heavy followed, something with his heartbeat, his steps, his silence. He paused. looked at the back of his hand. Another number, carved not in blood, but in truth. 9 doors to go. 9 pieces of himself to reclaim, or surrender. And somewhere deep within the floorboards, something whispered with his voice, "The next room doesn't wait for you. It remembers when you left it." Jamie no longer felt like a visitor. Somewhere along the twisted path of half, buried memories and living walls, he had crossed an invisible threshold. He wasn't just moving through the house. It was moving through him. Each room didn't just expose what he'd hidden. It remembered how he'd hidden it, not with malice, not even with anger, but with the quiet, aching disappointment of something that had always been there, always watching, and had waited far too long for him to admit what he'd done. The corridor ahead was clean, terrifyingly so. No dust, no claw marks, no blood or ash. The walls were pale yellow, the kind of color someone would pick to feel safe. The floor was carpeted, a soft pastel blue that muffled his footsteps, a hallway made to feel like home. But it wasn't. It had never been home. He knew it the moment he saw the door at the end, white, plain, the kind of door every apartment had, like it had been pasted from a catalog of cheap, forgettable design. But Jamie remembered this one, not because of what it looked like, but because of what it sounded like. That door had once slammed shut behind him. The night he chose himself. The night he walked away and never looked back. He stepped toward it, heart thudding in time with the soft hum, now vibrating through the floor. The doorknob was cold, not chilling, just indifferent, like it didn't care whether he turned it or not. Like the house already knew he would, and he did. The room inside was small, a table, 2 chairs, and someone waiting in the one across from him. Back straight, hands folded, face covered in shadow. Jamie didn't ask who they were. He knew. Even if the memory hadn't fully returned, the weight of the moment pressed down on his chest like a second heart trying to beat in conflict with his own. He sat. The chair groaned, but not from strain. It was the sound of something reawakening. The person across from him lifted their head. The face was blank at first, blurry, like fog behind glass. But with every second he spent trying not to look, it sharpened. Eyes first, then the mouth, then the hurt. Jamie opened his mouth, but no words came. The figure didn't blink, didn't breathe, just waited. Waited for the thing Jamie hadn't said then. The thing he was being asked, no, required, to say now. "I was scared," he finally whispered. But the face didn't change. "I didn't know how to help." Still nothing, he swallowed. "Maybe I didn't want to." That hurt to say. Even more to hear. But the truth didn't care about his pain. It wanted acknowledgement. It wanted an apology. "I left you there," Jamie said, voice cracking. "I left you with him because it was easier to walk away than to do what was right." A flicker in the figure's eyes. Not anger, recognition. "You cried?" Jamie continued, barely able to hold his own gaze. "You begged me, and I closed the door." The silence that followed wasn't punishment. It was space. A moment left open for what came next. "I'm sorry." And with that, the figure nodded once. Just once, and vanished. The table disappeared. The chair collapsed, and the room around him began to fold inward like paper curling in flame. He stood, but the floor was gone. Only memory remained, stacked and coiled around him, pulling him into the next truth. And as he fell through it, arms weightless, breath caught between confession and consequence, the house whispered 8. The number burned across his collarbone, etched into the skin like an oath sealed too late. 8 doors, 8 faces, 8 more echoes of the past waiting to be seen, not just remembered. And somewhere ahead, deeper than he'd ever gone, something knocked. Once, then again. A sound from a room he had never entered, because it had always been waiting for him to deserve it. The house no longer bothered hiding its rhythm. Jamie could feel it now, steady, slow, like a heart learning to beat again after a long sleep. The walls had grown more organic, breathing. He could hear blood moving behind the panels. hear footsteps not on the floor, but inside it. The silence between his own breaths wasn't empty anymore. It was listening, and it knew he was getting close. Too close. There was only one direction left now, and every step toward it felt like a betrayal to the version of himself who had promised he would never go this far. The hallway was narrow, walls tight enough to brush both shoulders, no lights, no windows. The only source of sight was an ambient gloom, like he was walking through the inside of an old memory that refused to decay. The air was still, but thick, with dust, with regret, with expectation. He had lost track of time, of course, but not entirely. The house had its own clock, and each room had been ticking 1 second forward. Until now. Now, he had reached the door that wasn't meant for him. It stood at the end of the hallway, like a commandment carved into the bones of the house. Taller than any other, blackened wood, a brass doorknob shaped like an eye, and etched into the surface, barely visible until he got close, was a single phrase, Liowu paramasidna loka. Jamie froze. The floor beneath his feet felt unsteady, as if the house itself were rethinking whether he had earned this moment. He reached for the knob, but the metal pulsed, warm, wet, alive, not warning him off, but waiting. He had been told once, long ago, by someone whose face he couldn't remember, but whose voice had left a scar, not to open this room. This room wasn't part of his past. It was part of someone else's. He turned the handle anyway. The door creaked open, not like wood, but like bone. Inside, the room was impossibly large, not because of its actual size, but because of how much it contained. Dozens of shelves lined the walls, reaching so high they vanished into darkness. Each shelf was packed with objects wrapped in cloth, labeled with neat little tags, written in a language Jamie didn't understand, but recognized. The room was still, reverent, like a vault. This wasn't a place of punishment, it was a place of secrets, not his, others. And the moment he stepped inside, something shifted behind him. The door slammed shut and locked. The whisper came immediately, not from the air, not from the shelves, but from his own mouth. You should not be here. Jamie spun, but there was no one else. Just the echo of his own guilt, rising like dust. He walked along the shelves, peering at the bundles. Each one pulsed softly as he passed. Then he found one unwrapped, small, delicate, a child's shoe, dirty, scorched. And the moment he looked at it, the room began to shake. Not violently, just enough to say, "Now you remember." He turned to leave, but the door was gone, vanished into smooth wall, and in its place stood a mirror, not glass, water, shimmering, surface trembling with every breath. Inside the reflection stood a woman, face covered in soot, holding the same shoe, looking directly at him. Jamie opened his mouth, but she shook her head once, slowly. Then she said, "You let him put it here." His knees buckled. This wasn't about what he did. It was about what he let someone else do. She hadn't been his secret. She had trusted him with hers. And when the time came to protect it, he had flinched, let the door close, let the memory be stored here, in the room where forgotten pain came to rot quietly. The walls began to cry. A slow drip of something black and warm trickled from the ceiling. The cloth bundles began to twitch. They remembered being alive, and they remembered who stood by. Jamie ran, searching the shelves for an exit, but there were no doors, no cracks. Just endless labels, names, stories, things that should have been spoken but weren't. The reflection in the water mirror smiled, not cruelly, sadly. "Say it." Jamie stepped forward, barely breathing. "I knew he was hurting you. I knew what he'd done, and I didn't tell. I didn't stop it. I told myself it wasn't my place, that it wasn't my shame." She nodded and whispered, "But you opened the door." The mirror shattered. The black water surged forward, and the room swallowed him whole. When he awoke, he was lying on his back in a hallway with no ceiling, just open sky. No stars, just darkness above, moving like breath. He sat up, trembling, looked at his forearm. The number had bled through his skin, raised and red like a fresh burn. 7 more. And the house had made its message clear. You don't survive by remembering your sins. You survive by remembering who you left behind to carry them. Jamie didn't remember standing up. He didn't remember walking. He only knew that he was moving again, barefoot over a new hallway, different from the last, but echoing with the same unspoken warning. Every step sent a tremor through the floor. Tiny, restrained. Like the house was restraining its full reaction, bottling it up. Holding its breath not in patience, but anticipation. The way someone holds a scream in their chest until the final blow. The air was thinner here. Not from lack of oxygen, but because the walls felt too full of things unsaid. The hallway led to a room with no door. Just an arch. No light, but somehow he could see. Inside was a studio, a place for art, but everything inside, canvases, brushes, easels, was warped by moisture. As if time had drowned this room long ago and only just now decided to spit it back out. The air stank of mold and varnish, and on every wall hung portraits. Dozens, maybe hundreds, each one painted in dark oils streaked with rust reds, bone white shades, thick blacks. But they all had one thing in common. They were all of Jamie, not as he saw himself, but as others had seen him. In one painting, he was hunched in the corner of a bedroom, hands over his ears while a girl cried out for help behind a locked door. In another, he stood in a field with his back to the viewer, holding a match, eyes turned away from the house already burning. Some portraits had faces twisted in guilt, others empty, eyed, ghostly. But none of them showed him smiling, not even once. He walked the perimeter, heart sinking lower with each step. None of these paintings existed before. The house wasn't showing him old art. It was creating it. From memory, from judgment. And then at the far end of the room was the largest canvas. Still unfinished, still wet. A chair sat before it, a palette, a brush, and a note. Written in the scrawl he recognized as his own, though he couldn't remember ever writing it. It's your turn. Jamie stepped forward and sat. The brush trembled in his hand. He didn't want to paint. He wanted to run. But this room was a mirror, and the canvas was already responding to his heartbeat. Shapes began to rise in the oils, even before he moved the bristles. Colors bled upward from the canvas itself, forcing form onto the space. It was painting through him. And what it revealed was not the version of himself he had learned to accept, or even the one he had tried so hard to bury. It showed him as a child, but not innocent, not wide-eyed, just watching a man hurt someone he loved, and choosing, in that moment, to say nothing. Not because he didn't understand, but because silence made him invisible, and invisible meant safe. Jamie dropped the brush. The room trembled. A low groan filled the air, not angry, but final. Every portrait on the walls began to shift. Eyes turned, hands reached, mouths opened. And each one spoke his name, not in accusation, but in recognition. They knew who he was now, because he did. He turned to leave, but the room had other plans. The walls split open. Inside the cracks, memories, flashes of bedrooms, hospitals, hallways. People with tired eyes and quiet pain who had looked at him, just once, waiting for him to say something. But he never had. He had always found a way to step aside, to disappear inside someone else's suffering. Let them carry it. Let them burn alone. The final portrait bled. Thick red paint slid down its surface, revealing a number underneath. Not painted. Carved. 6. He didn't touch it. Didn't need to. It was already inside him. Etched into his chest like a forgotten name finally spoken aloud. He stepped through the cracks in the wall. The studio fell silent behind him, but the echoes of his image followed. Now he understood, the house wasn't just showing him who he'd been. It was recording who he was now. And when the last portrait dried, there would be no hiding from it. There was something different in the air now. Not just the heaviness of memory, not the weight of guilt that pressed against Jamie's ribs like an old bruise returning. This was sharper, finer, like the tension before a wire snaps, or the precise, unbearable silence that comes just before a scream. The house was no longer dragging him from room to room. It didn't need to. It had already shown him enough of himself. Now it was only watching to see what he would do with it. But that, in its own way, felt even more cruel. He found the next room by sound. Not footsteps, not creaks, a whisper, barely audible but constant, not loud enough to form words, just breath, a hush. A memory repeating itself like a scratch on old tape. It came from behind a door that looked completely unremarkable. Plain wood, silver knob, no markings, except for one thing. The edge of the doorframe. The trim had been worn down, not by time, but by fingers. Hundreds of scratches scored the paint, carved into the wood with such desperation they had splintered. Jamie stared at them, and his stomach turned. He had seen this before. Not in a dream, not in some twisted, surreal part of the house. In real life. In his life. Long before the house. Before the memory got buried. A hallway. A screaming match downstairs. A girl, his cousin, who locked herself in the room after the second fight that day. And Jamie, 10 years old, standing outside the door, frozen. She had begged him to stay, to listen, just for a moment. But he didn't. He walked away, closed his own door, put in his headphones. And when the police came the next morning, they said she was already gone by then. Jamie had never asked for details. He told himself that silence was protection, but it was cowardice. Always had been. Now, the house had brought him back to that door, and the whisper behind it had changed. No longer vague, it spoke clearly now. In her voice, "You closed your door. I didn't." Jamie's hand trembled as it reached for the knob. It turned easily. No resistance. Inside was a replica of that room. The old posters on the wall. The stuffed bear on the bed. A broken vanity mirror with a single streak of dried mascara like a crack across its surface. And in the center of the room a chair, overturned. Jamie didn't want to see what lay next to it. But the house demanded it. There she was. Not decayed. Not monstrous. Just still. Frozen in time, the way the mind remembers people after they're gone, before the details rot. Her face was calm, not peaceful, empty. A tape recorder sat beside her hand, its plastic casing cracked, the tape inside long broken. But the whisper was still playing, over and over. "Don't go. Please just stay until he calms down." Jamie dropped to his knees, sobbing into his hands. Not because of what he'd done, but because of what he didn't. He hadn't shouted. Hadn't fought. Hadn't warned anyone. He just stayed in his room, music up, pretending nothing was happening on the other side of the wall. Because sometimes you don't need to act cruel to be the cause of something unforgivable. Sometimes you just need to be a coward. The room flickered, not like lights, like time. And in that flicker, the room reset. She disappeared. The bed straightened. The chair stood, everything tidy again. As if it had never happened. As if the house was giving him one chance to stay in that room, to not walk away this time. But he couldn't undo it. He was already part of the aftermath. His tears left no mark on the carpet. When he stood, the mirror glared back at him with an expression he didn't recognize. Not fear, not guilt. Resignation. He looked at the door. It had closed itself. This time, it had the final say. And carved into the inside of the wood, in small, clean strokes, was the number 5. Jamie didn't need to count anymore. The number was no longer just a countdown. It was a verdict. 5 stories left. 5 failures sealed into the bones of a house that remembered everything he hoped it wouldn't. And behind the next door, someone was already waiting, not to accuse him, not to punish him, but to ask the question he had never once had the courage to face. Why did you walk away from me? The hallway beyond the last door was darker than the rest. Not black, but dense, as if the air itself had taken on weight. Jamie's breaths were shorter now, more forced, and his footsteps barely made a sound. Not because the floor was soft, but because the house was listening again, closer than ever. And for the first time, It wasn't just remembering. It was reacting to his hesitation. The walls seemed to pulse slower when he paused, as if it were trying to match his breath, wait for his weakness, encourage it. This wasn't just a place for reflection anymore. This was judgment, and he had 4 doors left before it passed its sentence. At the end of the corridor stood a mirror. No door this time. Just a full-length mirror leaned against the wall like someone had forgotten to hang it. But Jamie knew better. This mirror wasn't forgotten. It had been waiting. There was no glass, just a sheet of polished metal so smooth, so unnaturally clear, that the reflection staring back at him felt more real than the man standing before it. The face in the mirror didn't match his expression. Not exactly. The eyes held something sharper. Not rage. Not pain. Recognition. And then it spoke. Not aloud. Not even in a whisper. The voice came from somewhere inside Jamie's spine. A familiar voice. Not his own. Not quite. Do you remember when you let him do it? Jamie didn't ask who. He didn't need to. The face in the mirror stepped forward, though Jamie hadn't moved. The reflection leaned closer, hands pressed to the other side of the glass, as if there was something between them, though there was not. You watched it happen. You didn't join in. You didn't stop it. You just stood there. The scene began to bleed into the mirror around the face. The hallway of a school, a boy cornered. Voices shouting words Jamie wouldn't repeat even in his own mind. Hands grabbing, shoving. A laugh that came from Jamie's own mouth, not because he found it funny, but because everyone else was laughing. That boy had looked up once. Straight at him. One look. Not a plea. Not a scream. Just a simple, soul-stripping question. Why won't you help me? Jamie had looked away. Just like everyone else. Because back then, silence was armor. Cowardice disguised as neutrality. And even as he told himself he hadn't touched anyone, hadn't thrown a punch, hadn't tripped the kid or said his name with venom, the truth was this: he didn't stop it. And that made him guilty. The mirror rippled. And suddenly, the boy was on the other side. Not bleeding, not crying, just watching. Still holding that same stare. Still waiting for an answer Jamie never gave. He tried to speak, but the boy cut him off with a single motion, raising one finger and pointing directly at him. Not accusing, just confirming. Jamie's mouth moved, but no sound came. The boy took a step closer. Their foreheads were almost touching now, separated by nothing but the skin of memory stretched taut over years of denial. You laughed. Jamie collapsed to his knees, not because he couldn't stand, but because there was nowhere left to run in this house. He didn't cry this time. There were no tears left, only the sharp, searing sting of knowing someone had carried that moment like a brand their entire life while he had carried it, like dust on a jacket. Barely remembered, easily brushed off. The boy blinked once and vanished. The mirror darkened, and across its surface, scorched into the metal, was the number 4, not carved, not painted, branded. The number hissed in silence as though fresh. Jamie stood, breath shallow, and looked down the hallway. It was shorter now. He could see the next door already. The house had stopped hiding, stopped pacing itself. Each step would be faster now, more direct, because there were only 4 rooms left, and in each one waited the people who had never looked away, even when Jamie had. The hallway ahead was lit differently, not by bulbs or flickering candlelight like the others, but by something dim and unnatural, an amber glow that seemed to seep from the cracks in the floorboards, like the house itself was bleeding memory. The walls didn't groan anymore. They listened. Jamie felt that in every step, the way the floor adjusted to his pace, how the ceiling dropped ever so slightly when he hesitated. The house no longer felt like a haunted place. It felt like a living mind, and he was inside its final, deepest thoughts. Each remaining door wasn't just a chapter of his life. It was a verdict waiting to be spoken aloud. This time there was no door, just an opening. A black arch impossibly tall, framing a room that pulsed like a throat, as though the house was about to speak him into submission. Jamie entered without breathing. The space was circular, cavernous, but without walls he could see. The blackness seemed to stretch forever, and in the center of it all was a platform, stone, cracked, and already occupied. A boy stood there, small, pale, familiar in a way that made Jamie's teeth hurt. The boy wasn't looking at him. He stared at something in his hands. A cassette recorder, identical to the one Jamie had seen in the girl's room. His thumb hovered over the play button. Jamie stepped closer, and the boy finally looked up, and there it was. The face, his own, not as a child, not a younger self. This version wasn't real. It was manufactured, stitched together from every moment Jamie had worn a mask to get through a day. The smile, people said, seemed a little forced. The polite tone he had used when his chest was full of screams. The friendly laugh that deflected anything deeper than small talk. It was the face he'd worn for years, long after the worst moments had passed, but while their echoes still scraped the inside of his skull. "Sit," the boy said. His voice was Jamie's, but perfectly steady, flat, practiced. Jamie sat across from him on the cold stone. "Do you know what's on the tape?" the boy asked. Jamie didn't answer. He didn't need to, because suddenly the tape began to play. Not with static, not even with a voice, but with moments. Every moment Jamie had spoken the right words with the wrong intentions. Every time he said, "I'm fine," when he was unraveling inside. Every time he nodded to stay quiet. Every time he told someone what they needed to hear, just so they wouldn't look too closely. The lies that weren't lies. The honesty that was performative. The smiles that were defense mechanisms. They all echoed now, layered over one another until they became a noise so distorted it barely sounded human anymore. A symphony of almost truths. The boy, his reflection, spoke again. "You convinced them you were better. But you never stopped hearing it." Jamie looked away. "No one asked," he whispered. The boy smiled. "Because you didn't let them." The room began to shift. Blackness peeled back like paint soaked in acid, revealing walls covered in words Jamie had once written, journals, emails he never sent, notes crumpled in pockets. All of them screamed versions of the same thing: "I don't know who I am anymore. It still hurts and I don't know why. I think I forgot how to be real." And under each one, in red, "Then why did you pretend?" Jamie stood shaking. "I wasn't ready," he said. "You can't just dig it out and expect everything to be clean underneath." "You weren't asked to be clean," the boy said calmly. "You were asked to be true." The tape stopped, and in the silence, Jamie could hear himself breathing. Ragged, real. The boy stood too, and for the first time, his mask faltered. The corners of his mouth trembled. His eyes shifted. Not cruel, but exhausted. He stepped forward and touched Jamie's chest with one finger. "Do you even know what your voice sounds like when you're not trying to protect everyone else from it?" Jamie didn't answer. Because he didn't know. He hadn't known in years, and that was the worst part. The boy faded. The stone cracked. The walls peeled back into shadow, and Jamie was left alone with nothing but a whisper in his own voice. "You lied to survive. But you forgot how to stop." The number was already burned into the floor beneath his feet. 3, not just a countdown. Now a confession. Only 3 rooms remained. 3 moments where the line between guilt and identity blurred completely. And the next voice he heard wouldn't ask him questions. It would blame him, and it would be right. The house didn't give Jamie time to rest anymore. It pulled him forward now, not with force, but with inevitability. The hallway leading from the mirrored chamber was narrower than the rest, the walls closer, the ceiling lower, as if the structure itself was pressing inward to remind him there was nowhere else to go. His breath echoed louder than his steps, and for the first time in hours, days, weeks, the house didn't breathe with him. It was silent, holding still, like it was watching to see whether he'd finally break before he reached the end. The next room wasn't behind a door. It was inside a doorway that had already collapsed. No hinges, no frame. Just the splinters of what had once been an entrance, torn apart violently and left to rot. Jamie stepped over the wreckage into a room that smelled of smoke and old sweat. The walls were bare concrete, damp with age. There was no furniture, no windows. Only one light hanging from a chain above, swaying slightly though there was no wind. And in the middle of the room stood a man, tall, broad, a shadow in the shape of a memory. Jamie's body reacted before his mind did. His knees locked, his lungs seized. The man turned and smiled, not with warmth, with familiarity. "Been a while," he said, his voice cutting through the stillness like gravel poured into silence. Jamie couldn't speak. He didn't need to. Because the man in front of him, shirt-stained, eyes too small for his skull, fists coiled tight even at rest, was a ghost Jamie had chosen to forget. Not because of what he'd done, but because Jamie had never stopped wondering how much of him he still carried inside. "Don't look so shocked," the man sneered. "You built this place. You think I wasn't going to show up." Jamie stepped back. "You're not real," he managed to whisper. The man laughed. "Neither are you." He moved forward, slow, predatory, until they were face to face. "You think just remembering makes you clean. You think crying in the dark makes you a good man now." Jamie shook his head. "I'm not trying to be good," he said. "I'm just trying to stop being you." The man's smile vanished, and for the first time, the rage surfaced. "You let me in," he said. "Every time you stayed quiet. Every time you looked away. Every time you pretended not to know." Jamie stood still. "You want to talk about the basement?" The man hissed. "Want to talk about the girl you promised to help? The brother you left behind? The kid at school who looked to you while I broke him?" Jamie's fists clenched. "You want to call me the monster?" The man continued. "I didn't hide. You did." He was right. Not about everything. But about that. Jamie had spent years pretending the worst parts of himself were foreign, like parasites he'd picked up by accident. He never owned them. Never admitted how often he'd looked away, not because he didn't know, but because he didn't want to know. The man circled him. "I made you," he said. "Every time you didn't speak. Every time you smiled and said you'd fine. You fed me. You kept me warm." Jamie's eyes burned. And then, without warning, the man was inches away again. "Say it," he growled. Jamie closed his eyes and said the thing he had never dared to whisper aloud. "I wanted to be like you." The words nearly broke him. "But I hated you more." The man's body jerked, as if struck. He reached for Jamie's throat, but his hand passed through. The room cracked. Not a sound. A feeling. The walls trembled, the floor shivered, and the man who had haunted him, not in memory but in habit, began to fade. Not with a scream, with a sigh. "Doesn't change what you did," the man whispered, eyes dimming. Jamie nodded. "I know." The figure dissolved into ash, sucked backward through the broken doorway like dust pulled into a vacuum. Jamie stood alone in the room. The light above him blinked once, then shut off, and in the blackness, a number lit itself across the wall in the glow of smoldering red. Only two rooms left. 2 stories. 2 shadows. But now he understood something the house had never said outright. Not all ghosts haunt you. Some live inside you until you're brave enough to tell them to leave. The hallway after the last room was unlike the others. It wasn't twisted or warped, not oppressive or monstrous. It was painfully normal. Soft yellow wallpaper, a dusty runner rug. Low, humming lights overhead. It looked like it belonged in a suburban house. The kind of hallway you'd find leading to childhood bedrooms, where framed family pictures hung crooked on the walls, and everything smelled like carpet cleaner and memories you never questioned. That's what made it so much worse. The ordinary is where the deepest wounds hide. Jamie didn't stop walking. Not because he was brave, but because he didn't think he could bear another pause. He didn't want to give the house time to decide how to break him next. He wanted, needed, to get through it. But even as he moved, he could feel the weight of the coming door. Not just a memory this time. Something unfinished. The room waited with a door that was already open. Not wide, just a crack. Just enough to see the flicker of lamplight inside. Just enough to feel the cold. Jamie pushed it open with one hand and stepped through. The room was a bedroom. Not his. Someone else's. Someone who had once loved him without hesitation, and who he had let down without a word. There were no horrors here. No blood. No echoes of screams. Just silence. And a desk by the window. The kind of desk you write letters at when you're too afraid to say what's on your mind out loud. On that desk was a single envelope, unsealed, unstamped, and addressed in his handwriting to the one I left without goodbye. Jamie's breath hitched. This wasn't about violence. This wasn't about betrayal. This was about abandonment, quiet, soft, invisible from the outside, but brutal just the same. He sat down in the chair, and the room didn't fight him. The walls didn't close in. The floor didn't creak. But something inside his chest twisted, because he remembered now. There was someone he had loved, someone who had reached out, repeatedly. And each time, Jamie had pulled away, not out of malice, but out of fear, out of guilt, out of the belief that he was too broken to deserve comfort. So he ghosted them, let the calls go unanswered, let the messages stack, promised to write back and never did, promised to visit and always had a reason not to. And then they were gone, not dead, just done, done waiting, done hoping. The kind of gone that never slams a door, just disappears. Jamie reached for the envelope, but the moment his fingers touched the paper, it spoke. Not aloud, through the pulse in his fingertips. A memory bloomed, full and unrelenting, the last voicemail he never listened to. The one that ended not in anger, but in a pause. A breath. A whisper, "I get it. I just wish you'd said goodbye." He'd never replied. Because he hadn't known how. Because the truth, that he didn't feel worthy of being loved, felt too pathetic to admit. The letter in front of him was blank, waiting. Jamie picked up the pen beside it. He didn't know what to write. But he started anyway. He wrote the apology he never had the courage to speak. He didn't dress it up. Didn't explain or excuse. He just wrote the truth. That he had been afraid. That he had convinced himself walking away was the kindest thing to do. That he never stopped thinking about them. That he hoped they had found peace without him. And that he was sorry for turning their kindness into something that hurt. When he finished, the letter folded itself, the envelope sealed, and slowly turned to ash in his hands, clean, silent, without smoke. He didn't cry, but his hands shook long after it was gone. The lamp on the desk flickered, and across its shade a number appeared. One room left, the final truth. And as Jamie stood and looked toward the doorway ahead, the house made no sound. Because it didn't need to. It had shown him everything but one thing, and that thing was himself. Jamie walked the last hallway with no sense of triumph, no resolve, no rising music of redemption, just a steady, hollow rhythm in his chest and the awareness that whatever was waiting behind the final door was not something he could defeat. Only face. The air around him was still now, the walls unmoving, as if the house itself had finally gone quiet out of respect. Not for Jamie, for the moment, for the closing of the circle. Each step felt slower than the last, not because his legs failed him, but because he understood, deep in the marrow of his bones, that the end wouldn't deliver freedom. It would only leave him with himself. The last door stood open, wide. A mirror of the first door he had passed through so long ago, only now it was warped. Not by the house, but by everything Jamie had brought into it. The handle was scorched. The hinges sagged. This door had been opened and closed so many times it had lost count. Jamie stepped through it like a man walking into his own grave. Inside, the room was empty. No windows, no sound, no light at first. But as he moved to the center, something flickered. A small bulb overhead buzzed to life, revealing not a monstrous version of his past, not an echo or a voice or a twisted figure in the shape of guilt. Just a chair, a single chair, and on it, himself. Jamie stared. The version of him seated in the chair looked up. Same eyes, same posture, but aged in a way time alone couldn't account for. This Jamie looked tired, not exhausted, not frightened, just done. And he smiled. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't warm, it was real. You finally made it, the seated Jamie said. Jamie stood still. What is this? This, the other said, gesturing to the bare room, is the version of you that stayed behind every time you walked away. Every time you shut a door and didn't open it again. Every time you pretended the pain wasn't yours to carry. Jamie's chest tightened. You look like hell, he said. The other Jamie laughed softly. That's because you gave me everything you couldn't handle. Every silence. Every scream. Every second of pretending. Jamie stepped closer. What happens now? The man in the chair didn't answer immediately. He leaned back, looking up at the light above them. That depends, he said. Do you finally understand? Jamie didn't respond. He didn't have to, because something inside him had shifted the moment he stepped into this room. This wasn't a room built to punish or haunt, or even show him the past. It was a room built to return, to give back the things he left in others, to hand him every broken promise, every echo of the times he stood by instead of stepping forward. You made it through, the seated Jamie said. But I stayed behind. Someone had to hold the pieces. Jamie shook his head. You don't have to anymore. The man stood. They faced each other. Two versions of one life. The one who ran, and the one who paid for it. There was no magic word, no final confession, no dramatic gesture. Only the quiet understanding between a man and his mirror. Jamie reached out, touched the other's hand, and for the first time, nothing shattered. Nothing screamed. The room didn't twist or crumble, because there was nothing left to fear. Nothing left to run from. The man before him faded, not violently, not tragically, just gently, like fog in morning light, and as he vanished, a final number appeared across the far wall, drawn in soft gold 0, not a countdown anymore, not an ending, a return to origin. Jamie stood alone in the room, and for the first time it was truly silent. The kind of silence that comes after the truth is finally spoken. He stepped out of the room, back into the hallway. But it was gone. The house was gone. The world around him was still. And in the space where the house had once stood was nothing but open field, and the morning sun breaking through a low mist. Jamie stood there, unsure of what came next. But this time, there were no more doors, no more rooms. Just a man who had walked through the worst of himself and survived. And the echo of a voice he could finally call his own.